Welcome. Tonight on NightSleepWhisper, we are embarking on a journey that transcends time and space. Sit back, dim the lights, and open the doors of your mind. An uninterrupted 50-chapter mystery awaits you, as we track the desert rose alongside Detective Jack. As we travel from dusty desert roads to stormy ocean shores, let my voice carry you into a deep sleep and a peaceful adventure. If you are ready, our story begins. Jack sat in his office. It was a very hot Monday morning. The sun shone through the window. The light was very bright. The fan on his desk moved slowly from side to side. It made a low humming noise, but it did not help much. Jack was a private investigator. He was 35 years old. He looked for missing things and missing people. Usually, his work was in the big city. He liked the tall buildings and the busy streets. But today, the city felt too crowded and too loud. He picked up his cup of coffee. The coffee was cold and bitter. He put it back on the desk. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was 10 o'clock. Suddenly, he heard the door open. The mailman walked into the small room. He looked tired because of the heat. "Good morning, Jack," the mailman said. He put a small pile of letters on Jack's wooden desk. "Good morning, Bill," Jack replied. "It is a hot one today." "Yes, it is," Bill said. He turned and left the office. The heavy door closed behind him. Jack looked at the mail. Most of the letters were bills for his rent and his electricity. But one letter at the bottom of the pile looked different. The envelope was a light brown color. It felt rough in his hands. He noticed a little bit of fine, yellow sand on the corners of the paper. The stamp was old and had a picture of a green cactus on it. The address was written in dark blue ink. Jack opened the letter carefully. He used a silver letter opener. Inside, the paper was thin and yellow. The handwriting was neat, but the letters were a bit shaky. He began to read the message. "Dear Mr. Jack, my name is Diane. I live in a town called Oak Haven. It is a small, quiet place in the middle of the desert. We have a very big problem here. A famous and expensive painting is gone. It is called the Desert Rose. The local people are very worried. The police cannot find the thief. Please come to Oak Haven and help us. I will pay you well for your time. Meet me at the Dusty Road Inn on Tuesday at noon." Jack looked at the large map on his office wall. Oak Haven was a tiny dot far away. It was a long drive across the dry hills and empty roads. He did not know Diane, and he had never heard of the Desert Rose painting. However, the letter felt important. He felt a spark of curiosity in his heart. He needed a break from the city. He stood up and put on his brown leather jacket. He grabbed his hat from the coat rack. He folded the mysterious letter and put it safely in his pocket. He turned off the slow fan. The room became very silent. He walked to the door and locked it with a heavy metal key. He heard the lock click into place. He walked down the stairs to the street. His old blue car was waiting. He started the engine. Jack looked at the road ahead. The journey to the desert was beginning. Jack drove his blue car for many hours. The road was very long and very straight. On both sides of the road, there was only sand and small, dry bushes. The sun was high in the sky. It felt like a giant, hot lamp. The air inside the car was warm, even with the windows open. A thin layer of white dust covered the dashboard. Jack wiped it away with his hand, but more dust came through the window. Finally, he saw a wooden sign near the path. The sign said, "Oak Haven, 5 miles." He felt a little bit of excitement. He wanted to get out of the car and walk. He wanted to drink some cold water. He looked at the gas gauge. It was nearly empty. He hoped the town had a gas station. The town of Oak Haven was very small. Most of the buildings were made of wood and stone. The paint on the walls was old and dry. It was falling off in small pieces. Jack drove slowly down the main street. He looked for people, but the streets were empty. It was noon, and the sun was too hot for most people to be outside. The only movement was a dry tumbleweed rolling across the road. He saw a sign for the Dusty Road Inn. It was a tall, two-story building with a wide porch. Jack parked his car in front of it. He turned the key, and the engine stopped. The silence of the desert was very sudden and very heavy. He stepped out of the car. The ground was hard and dry under his boots. He walked to the back of the car and took out his small suitcase. He felt the hot wind on his face. He walked up the wooden stairs of the inn. Each step made a sound under his weight. He reached the front door and pushed it open. Inside, the room was dark and cool. The air smelled like old paper and dry wood. A tall man stood behind a long wooden desk. He wore a white shirt and a black vest. He was about 60 years old. He had a very short grey beard and kind eyes. He was reading a newspaper. He looked up and smiled at Jack. "Good afternoon," the man said. His voice was deep and slow. "Welcome to Oak Haven. My name is Frank. Are you looking for a room?" "Yes, please," Jack replied. "My name is Jack. I have a meeting here tomorrow." Frank turned a large book on the desk. He picked up a pen. "You are our only guest today, Jack. It is a quiet season. People do not visit the desert in this heat." Jack signed his name in the book. Frank took a heavy metal key from a hook on the wall. "Room 202 is at the top of the stairs," Frank said. "It has a good view of the mountains. I hope you like the silence." Jack took the key. It felt cold in his hand. He thanked Frank and walked toward the stairs. He was tired from the long drive, but he was ready to start his work. Jack put his small suitcase on the bed in room 202. The bed was small, but the white sheets were clean and fresh. He walked to the window and pulled back the thin curtains. From here, he could see the whole town. The mountains in the distance looked purple under the bright sky. The heat made the air move like water above the hot ground. Jack splashed some cold water on his face from a ceramic bowl on the table. He felt a little better. He took the brown envelope from his pocket and looked at it one more time. He needed to find answers. He left the inn and walked down the quiet street. The wooden sidewalk felt hot under his boots. He saw a white building at the end of the road. It was larger than the other houses. A flag moved slowly in the warm wind. A sign above the door said, "Oak Haven Town Hall." Jack walked up the stairs and opened the heavy door. Inside, the air was very still. He walked down a short hallway with a dark carpet. He saw a door at the end. The door was made of dark oak wood. A small gold sign on the door said, "Mayor Miller." Jack tapped his fingers on the wood. "Come in," a loud, deep voice said from inside. Jack opened the door and stepped into a large office. The room was full of old books and maps of the desert. A very tall man stood by a big window. He wore a dark suit and a very large, brown cowboy hat. His face was thin, and his eyes were as blue as the desert sky. This was Mayor Miller. He turned around and looked at Jack for a long time. He did not smile. "Can I help you?" the mayor asked. He put his hands on his belt. "My name is Jack," Jack said clearly. "I am a private investigator from the city. I am here because I received a letter." The mayor walked toward his large desk. He sat down in a heavy leather chair. "A detective in Oak Haven. We are a very small and very safe town, Mr. Jack. We do not have crimes here. We do not need people like you. Jack walked closer to the desk. A woman named Diane wrote to me. She told me about a missing painting. She called it the Desert Rose. She said the town is in trouble. Mayor Miller laughed, but his eyes stayed cold and hard. He shook his head slowly. Diane is a nice woman, but she has a very big imagination. She is a dreamer. There is no missing painting. Mr. Jack, there is no mystery in Oak Haven. The Desert Rose is just an old story for tourists. The mayor stood up. He was even taller than Jack thought. He pointed toward the door. You are wasting your time here. The sun is very hot today. It is a good day for a long drive back to the city. I suggest you leave before dark. Jack did not move for a moment. He looked at the mayor's face. He saw a small drop of sweat on the man's forehead. The mayor was not just angry. He was nervous. Jack nodded his head and turned to the door. He walked out of the office and back into the bright sunlight. He knew the mayor was lying. Jack walked back to the center of the town. The mayor's words were cold, but the sun was hotter. Jack did not like being told what to do. He knew the mayor was hiding something. He looked for a place where a painting might be. Soon, he saw a small building made of red bricks. It had a large glass window. A sign in the window said, Oak Haven Art Gallery. Open. Jack pushed the door. The air inside was cool and smelled like oil paint and old wood. The walls were covered with paintings of the desert, the mountains, and the sky. In the corner, a woman sat at a small desk. She had short red hair and wore a green dress. She looked up when Jack entered. Her face was pale. Can I help you? She asked. Her voice was very quiet. I'm looking for Diane. Jack said. He walked toward her. The woman stood up. She tried to smile, but she looked very worried. I am Diane. Who are you? Jack took the brown letter from his pocket. He showed it to her. My name is Jack. You wrote to me. I am the investigator from the city. Diane's eyes became very wide. She looked at the front door and then at the window. She seemed afraid that someone was watching. She reached out to take the letter. Jack noticed her hands. They were shaking very much. She could not hold the paper still. Oh, thank goodness you are here. She whispered. I was starting to think you would not come. Did anyone see you come in? Only the sun and the dust. Jack replied. And I spoke to Mayor Miller. He told me there is no mystery here. He said you are a dreamer. Diane sat back down in her chair. She put her hands in her lap to hide the shaking. The mayor is a powerful man. Jack. He wants everyone to think everything is perfect. But it is not. A very special painting was taken from this gallery 2 nights ago. It is called the Desert Rose. It is the most important thing in Oak Haven. Jack looked around the room. He saw many beautiful pictures, but one spot on the main wall was empty. There was only a clean square of white paint where a frame used to be. Is that where it was? Jack asked, pointing to the empty spot. Diane nodded. A single tear ran down her cheek. Yes. I locked the door at night. I turned on the lights. In the morning, the door was still locked, but the painting was gone. No one heard a thing. No windows were broken. It was like magic, but a very bad kind of magic. Jack walked to the empty wall. He looked at the floor. He saw a tiny scratch on the wood. Tell me about the painting. Diane. Why is it so important? Is it just worth a lot of money? Diane shook her head. It is worth more than money. People say it has a secret. The artist, Leo, was a strange man. He did not just paint pictures. He painted stories and maps. Now, Leo is missing too. I am very scared. Jack. I think the mayor knows where the painting is. Jack looked out the window. The street was still empty, but he felt a heavy weight in the air. The mystery was real, and it was dangerous. Jack walked closer to the wall. He saw a very large frame made of heavy wood. It was painted with bright gold paint. The gold shone in the afternoon light. But inside the frame, there was no painting. There was only the grey wall of the gallery. It looked very sad and empty. The frame is still here, Jack said. He touched the gold wood with his finger. It felt cool and smooth. Why did the thief leave the frame? This frame looks very expensive. A thief usually takes everything. Diane walked to his side. She looked at the empty space. The frame is beautiful, but the painting is the real treasure. The thief was in a hurry. A large frame is heavy and very hard to carry. A person can roll up a canvas and hide it under a coat. It is much easier to run away that way. Jack looked at the corners of the frame. He saw a small piece of blue string caught in the wood. He picked it up carefully. It was very thin. Was there blue in the painting? He asked. Yes. Diane replied. The sky in the painting was a very deep blue. Leo, the artist, used a special paint from the mountains. It was very rare and very bright. Everyone in town loved that blue color. Jack looked at the floor again. He saw no footprints. The floor was very clean. There was no dust and no dirt. Did you clean the gallery yesterday morning? Jack asked. No. Diane said. She shook her head. I was too upset to clean. I called the mayor first. He came to the gallery with the sheriff. They looked at the room for only 5 minutes. Then they told me to be quiet. They said it was not a big crime. They told me not to tell anyone. Jack felt a bad feeling in his stomach. The mayor wanted this to be a secret. But why? Who has the keys to this building? Diane. Only me and Leo have keys. She said. But the mayor has a spare key for emergencies. He says it is for safety because the gallery is a town building. Jack looked at the heavy front door. It was made of solid metal and wood. The lock is not broken. The windows are all closed and locked from the inside. The person who took the painting did not break in. They had a key. Diane sat down on a small wooden bench. Does that mean Leo took it? Or the mayor? I do not want to believe it. Leo loves his art more than anything. He would never hurt his own work. He is a good man. The room was very quiet. Outside, the wind blew a little sand against the glass window. A soft scratching sound came from the desert wind against the building. Jack looked at the empty gold frame. It was a difficult puzzle. A thief with a key is a very dangerous person. I need to see where Leo lives. Jack said. Maybe he left a clue in his house. Diane pointed toward the back of the town. His house is near the old water tower. It is a small house with a blue door. But please be careful. Jack. People in Oak Haven are starting to watch you. Jack walked out of the gallery. The sun was lower in the sky now. The light was orange and red. The shadows of the buildings were very long on the dusty ground. He started his walk toward the old water tower. The water tower was a tall, rusty metal structure. It stood on the edge of the town. It looked like a giant skeleton against the red sky. The walk was quiet. He did not see any other people. He found the house Diane described. It was small and stood alone at the end of the path. The walls were a pale yellow, but the door was a bright, beautiful blue. It was the same blue as the small string Jack found in the gallery. Jack stood in front of the wooden gate. He looked at the windows of the house. There were no lights inside. The house was dark and very silent. Suddenly, Jack felt a cold feeling on the back of his neck. He felt like two eyes were looking at him from the dark. He did not turn around immediately. He stood very still. He looked at the reflection in a small piece of glass on the ground. He saw a dark shape behind a large cactus across the street. It was a person. The person was tall and wore a long, dark coat. The coat moved slightly in the warm wind. Jack turned around quickly. "Who is there?" he called out. His voice was loud and clear in the quiet air. No one answered. The person did not move for a second. Then, the shadow moved quickly behind a stone wall. Jack ran across the dusty street. His boots hit the hard ground with a steady rhythm. He reached the wall and looked behind it. The street was empty. There was only the sound of the wind and the moving sand. He looked at the ground near the wall. He saw fresh footprints in the soft sand. The shoes were large and heavy. They were the footprints of a man wearing work boots. The person was gone, but they were very fast. Jack looked at the empty street for a long time. He felt a heavy weight in his chest. He walked back to Leo's house. The blue door seemed to glow in the fading orange light. He felt a sense of danger now. Someone was watching him. Someone did not want him to learn the truth about the artist or the painting. He reached the blue door. He did not have a key, but he had his detective tools. He looked around the street one more time to be safe. The shadow did not return. The town felt like it was holding its breath. Jack put a small tool into the lock. He moved it slowly and carefully. The lock turned. The blue door opened slowly into the dark house. He stepped inside and closed the door. He was now alone in the artist's home. The next morning, the sun was bright and hot again. Jack woke up early at the dusty road inn. He ate a simple breakfast of bread and fruit. He thought about the shadow he saw the night before. He thought about the empty house with the blue door. He needed more information. He decided to visit the only garage in Oak Haven. The garage was a large, metal building at the edge of the main road. Outside, there were many old tires and broken pieces of metal. A few old cars sat in the dirt, covered in brown dust. Jack walked toward the open door. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil and old rubber. A man was working under a large truck. Jack could only see the man's legs. Suddenly, a heavy metal tool hit the concrete floor. The man slid out from under the truck on a small wooden board. He stood up and wiped his hands on a dark, dirty cloth. He was a strong man with short hair and a friendly face. "Good morning," the man said. "I am Sam. Are you the man staying at Frank's Inn?" "Yes. I am Jack." Jack replied. "I am a visitor here. People say you know everything that happens on these roads." Sam laughed and put the cloth on a wooden table. "Well, Oak Haven is a very small town. I see every car that comes and goes. Do you need help with your car?" "My car is fine for now," Jack said. "I am actually asking about the night the painting disappeared. It was 2 nights ago. Were you here?" Sam stopped smiling. He looked at the open door to make sure no one was listening. He leaned closer to Jack. "I was here late that night. I was fixing the engine of a tractor. It was very dark and very quiet. Around midnight, I heard a car engine. It was a low, smooth sound. It did not sound like the old trucks we have in this town." Jack narrowed his eyes. "What did you see, Sam?" "I looked out the window," Sam whispered. "I saw a long, black car. It was driving very slowly away from the art gallery. The strange thing was the lights. The car had no lights on. It moved like a ghost in the dark." "Did you see the driver?" Jack asked. Sam shook his head. No. The windows were very dark. I could not see inside. The car turned at the corner and drove toward the mountains. I have never seen that car in Oak Haven before. Jack felt a cold shiver despite the heat. A black car with no lights was a very good clue. Did anyone else see it? I don't think so, Sam said. Most people are asleep at midnight, and the mayor tells everyone to mind their own business. But I don't like secrets, Jack. This town is changing, and not in a good way. Jack thanked Sam for the help. He walked out of the cool garage and back into the sun. He now knew a black car was involved. He needed to find out who owned that car and where it went in the mountains. Jack walked back to the dusty road inn. The sun was very high now. The heat felt heavy on his shoulders. He entered the inn, and the cool air felt good on his skin. Frank, the man at the desk, was not there. The lobby was very quiet. Jack walked up the wooden stairs to his room. The wood made a soft noise under his feet, but the house was otherwise silent. He entered room 202 and locked the door. He sat on the bed and thought about Sam's story. A black car with no lights was a very important clue. But where did the car go? The mountains were big and full of hiding places. He needed a better way to look at the desert. Jack looked around the room. He noticed something strange. The small wooden drawer of the bedside table was not closed completely. He remembered closing it tightly before he left. He walked to the table and pulled the drawer open. Inside the drawer, there were some old magazines about desert plants. Jack moved the magazines. Underneath them, he found a folded piece of paper. The paper felt thick and old. It was yellowed at the edges. Jack opened it carefully. It was a map of Oak Haven and the surrounding desert. The map was very detailed. It showed every small path, every hill, and every dry river. Jack looked at the drawing of the town. He saw the gallery, the inn, and the mayor's office. Then, his eyes moved to the desert area outside the town. Deep in the desert, far from the main road, someone had made a mark. There was a large, red X drawn with a pen. Next to the X, the map had a small drawing of a stone structure. Below the drawing, a name was written in small letters. The Old Well. Jack felt his heart beat a little faster. This map was not here this morning. Someone had entered his room while he was at the garage. Someone wanted him to find this X. Was it a friend like Diane? Or was it a trap from the person in the dark coat? He looked at the red X again. The old well was about 5 miles into the desert. There were no real roads to that place, only sand and rocks. It was a lonely and dangerous place to go alone. But Jack knew he had to go. The secret of the desert rose was waiting for him in the sand. He checked his bag. He had a flashlight, a bottle of water, and his notebook. He put the map in his pocket. He looked out the window at the distant hills. The desert looked beautiful, but he knew it held many secrets. He left the room and walked down the stairs. He did not see Frank. He walked out to his blue car. He was ready to find the old well. Jack left the town of Oak Haven behind him. The paved road ended quickly. Now, his blue car moved over a path of dirt and small rocks. The car shook as it hit the uneven ground. The desert was vast and silent. It felt like an ocean of yellow sand and brown rocks. There were no trees to provide shade. The only plants were tall, green cacti that stood like soldiers under the hot sun. Jack looked at the old map on the seat next to him. He followed the dusty path toward the red X. The air outside was very still. Even the wind had stopped blowing. After 30 minutes of driving, Jack reached a small hill. He drove to the top and looked down. In the middle of a flat area of sand, he saw a stone structure. It was the old well. It was made of heavy, grey rocks piled on top of each other. A small wooden roof covered the top of the well, but the wood was grey and rotting. Around the well, there was a fence made of thin wooden posts and wire. Jack stopped his car. He turned off the engine. The sudden silence was very heavy. He stepped out of the car and felt the heat hit his face like a physical weight. He walked slowly toward the well. His boots made a soft grinding noise on the stones. He noticed something immediately. The wooden fence was not just old. It was broken. One side of the fence was pushed down into the dirt. The wood was splintered into sharp pieces. It did not look like the wind had broken it. It looked like a heavy vehicle had hit it with great force. Jack knelt down in the sand near the broken wood. He brushed some dust away with his hand. He saw something very important. There were deep marks in the sand. They were tire tracks. The tracks were wide and very fresh. The wind had not had time to cover them with new sand yet. This meant a car had been here very recently, perhaps only a few hours ago. Jack followed the tracks with his eyes. They came from the direction of the town and stopped right next to the well. Then, the tracks turned around and went back the same way. Jack thought about the long, black car that Sam the mechanic had described. These tracks were wide, like the tires of a heavy, expensive car. He walked to the edge of the stone well. He leaned over and looked down into the dark hole. He could not see the bottom. The air coming from the well felt cool and damp. He picked up a small stone from the ground and dropped it into the darkness. He waited for a long time. Finally, a soft splashing sound came from deep below. There was water in the well, but it was very far down. Jack looked around the area one more time. He saw a small flash of light in the dirt. He reached down and picked up a tiny object. It was a silver button. It was very clean and did not have any rust or dirt on it. It was a high-quality button, the kind a person would find on an expensive suit. He put the button in his pocket. He thought about Mayor Miller and his dark, professional suits. Jack looked toward the horizon. The sun was starting to move lower. He felt a sense of dread. The desert was a beautiful place, but it was also a very good place to hide a secret. The sun was now a deep orange ball on the horizon. The shadows of the cacti were very long and very dark. The desert was no longer bright and yellow. It was turning purple and grey. Jack felt the temperature drop quickly. In the desert, the nights are very cold, even when the days are very hot. He put his hands in his pockets. He felt the silver button and the old map. These were small clues, but they were important. He walked away from the old well and back toward his blue car. The car looked small and lonely in the middle of the empty land. As he got closer, he noticed something white on the front window. It was a small piece of paper. It was stuck under the windshield wiper. Jack stopped for a moment. He looked around the desert. He saw the rocks, the sand, and the dry bushes. He did not see any people. He did not see the black car. But someone had been here. Someone had walked to his car while he was looking at the well. He reached the car and pulled the paper from the window. It was a plain white envelope. There was no name on the outside. He opened it with slow, careful movements. Inside was a single piece of paper. The message was written in large, capital letters. The ink was black and thick. "Stop looking or you will be sorry. Leave Oak Haven now." Jack felt a cold chill in his chest. This was not a friendly warning. It was a threat. The person who took the painting was watching him. They knew he was at the well. They knew he was asking questions. Jack looked at the hills again. He felt like 100 eyes were hidden in the shadows of the rocks. He climbed into his car and closed the door. The sound of the door closing was firm and loud in the silence. He started the engine. The engine made a low, steady noise that made him feel a little safer. He turned on his headlights. The bright beams of light cut through the growing darkness. They showed the dusty path back to town. As he drove, Jack thought about the mayor. Mayor Miller wanted him to leave. The mayor said there was no mystery. But now, Jack had a stolen painting, a missing artist, a secret map, a silver button, and a death threat. The mystery was very real. He drove slowly. He did not want to hit a rock or lose the path. The desert at night was a different world. It was beautiful but scary. He reached the edge of Oak Haven after 30 minutes. The lights of the town were small and dim. He did not go back to the inn immediately. He drove past the gallery and the mayor's office. Both buildings were dark. He parked his car in front of the dusty road inn. He stayed in the car for a minute. He looked at the note again. "You will be sorry," it said. Jack was not a man who got scared easily. He was a detective. He liked puzzles. This threat did not make him want to leave. It made him want to stay and find the truth. He put the car keys in his pocket and walked into the inn. Jack did not go to sleep. He sat in the dark room and looked out the window. The town of Oak Haven was very quiet under the moon. He kept the threatening note on the table. He thought about the silver button in his pocket. He was sure the button belonged to the mayor. But he needed to be certain. He needed to see what the mayor did at night. At midnight, Jack saw a flash of light in the street. A door opened across the road. It was the door to the town hall. A tall man stepped out. It was Mayor Miller. He was not wearing his large cowboy hat now. He wore a dark coat and moved very quickly. He looked to the left and then to the right. He seemed very nervous. Jack stood up. He put on his shoes and walked out of his room. He moved like a shadow down the wooden stairs. He did not want Frank to hear him. He opened the front door of the inn very slowly. The cool night air hit his face. He saw the mayor walking toward the back of the town, away from the main street. Jack followed him at a distance. He stayed close to the wooden buildings. He did not walk on the sidewalk because his boots would make too much noise. He walked on the soft sand instead. The mayor turned a corner near the old post office. Jack reached the corner and looked around the edge of a brick wall. Behind the post office, there was a narrow, dark alley. A single light hung from a wire, but it was very dim. A man was already waiting there. He was a very tall stranger. He wore a gray suit and held a black briefcase. The mayor stopped in front of the stranger. Jack moved closer. He hid behind a large metal trash bin. He could hear their voices, but they were speaking in low whispers. "Do you have the money?" the stranger asked. His voice was sharp and cold. "Not yet," the mayor replied. He sounded angry. "The detective is making things difficult. He is asking too many questions. He went to the old well today." The stranger took a step forward. "That is a problem. The deal must happen on Friday. If the detective finds the artist, everything is finished. Do you understand?" "I sent him a warning," the mayor said. "He will leave soon. Everyone leaves Oak Haven when they get scared." The stranger shook his head. "He does not look like a man who gets scared. You must handle him, Miller, or I will handle him myself." The stranger turned and walked away toward the dark desert. He disappeared into the night. The mayor stayed in the alley for a long time. He looked very tired. He put his head in his hands. Then, he turned and walked back toward the town hall. Jack waited until the street was empty again. He felt a cold sweat on his back. The mayor was working with a dangerous stranger. They were talking about money and the missing artist, Leo. And now, Jack knew he was in real danger. Friday was only 2 days away. He had to find Leo before the deal happened. Jack did not go back to the inn to sleep. He walked through the shadows to Diane's house. He stayed away from the streetlights. He reached her front door and knocked softly 3 times. He waited. After a minute, the porch light turned on. Diane opened the door a little bit. She looked through the small gap. When she saw Jack, she sighed with relief. "Come in, quickly," she whispered. She pulled him inside and locked the door with 2 heavy bolts. The house was warm and smelled like lavender and old books. Diane led him into a small room. This was her study. There were many books on the walls from the floor to the ceiling. A small desk sat in the middle of the room with a lamp. The light was soft and yellow. "I saw the mayor tonight," Jack said. He sat in a wooden chair. He met a stranger in the alley. They talked about a deal on Friday. They also talked about Leo. Diane's face became very pale. She sat on the edge of her desk. Friday is the town's birthday. There is always a big party. Many people come from other towns. It is a very busy day. It is the perfect time to do something secret. The mayor said he sent me a warning. Jack continued. He wants me to leave. But I found a silver button at the old well. It looks like it came from his suit. Diane looked at the books on the wall. She looked like she was making a big decision. "Jack, I need to show you something. I did not tell the sheriff. I did not even tell the mayor. But Leo told me about a secret place in this house." She stood up and walked to a large bookshelf in the corner. The shelf was full of heavy history books. She reached for a thick, red book on the 3rd shelf. She did not pull the book out. Instead, she pushed it toward the wall. Suddenly, a low grinding noise came from the wall. The entire bookshelf began to move. It did not swing like a door. It slid slowly to the left. Behind the shelf, there was a dark opening in the wall. "Leo built this for me," Diane said. "He said every gallery owner needs a safe place for the most important things." Jack stood up and followed her into the opening. Diane turned on a small flashlight. The room was tiny. There was a small table and a single chair. On the table, there were several rolls of paper and a set of professional painting brushes. "Leo spent a lot of time here before he disappeared," Diane explained. "He was working on something secret. He called it his insurance policy. He said that if anything happened to him, the truth would be in this room." Jack walked to the table. He picked up one of the rolls of paper. He opened it carefully. It was not a painting. It was a technical drawing of the bank's floor plan. There were red circles around the basement area. Why was an artist drawing the inside of a bank? Jack asked himself aloud. "I don't know," Diane said. "But look at this." She pointed to a small wooden box under the table. Inside the box was a single, beautiful blue rose made of glass. It was the same bright blue as the painting. Jack felt the mystery getting bigger. The artist was not just a painter. He was watching the bank. And the mayor was watching the artist. Jack spent the rest of the night looking at the papers in the hidden room. He found a small photograph of a man. The man was thin and had long, dark hair. He looked about 40 years old. He had a kind face, but his eyes looked very tired in the picture. He was holding a paintbrush and standing in front of a large canvas. "This is Leo," Diane said. Her voice was full of sadness. "He is a very talented man. He came to Oak Haven 5 years ago because he wanted peace. He wanted to paint the light of the desert." Jack looked at the photograph closely. "When exactly did he disappear?" "Diane, tell me the story again." Diane sat on the small chair in the secret room. "It was Saturday night. We had dinner together at the inn. He seemed very nervous. He kept looking at the door. He told me he was working on a special project for Mayor Miller. He said the project was almost finished, but he felt like he was in a cage. He did not want to do it anymore. Did he say what the project was? Jack asked. No. Diane replied. He said it was better if I did not know. He left the inn at 9 o'clock. He said he was going back to his studio to finish his work. But the next morning, he was gone. His house was empty. His bed was not slept in. I went to the mayor, but the mayor told me that Leo decided to leave town. He said Leo was tired of the desert and went back to the city. Jack shook his head. But his blue car is still in his garage. His clothes are still in his closet. A man does not leave his whole life behind if he is just tired of a town. He was taken, or he is hiding. Jack looked at the drawing of the bank again. Leo was an artist, but he was also a man who observed things. He noticed the details of the buildings. He noticed where the guards stood. Maybe the special project for the mayor was related to the bank. What do you think happened to him? Diane asked. Her hands were still. She was waiting for Jack's answer. I think Leo discovered that the mayor is not an honest man. Jack said. The mayor is using the gallery and the bank for something bad. Leo wanted to stop, and now he is missing. The theft of the painting happened 3 days after Leo disappeared. That is not a coincidence. Jack stood up and put the photograph in his pocket. He felt a new sense of urgency. If Leo was still alive, he was in great danger. The deal on Friday was only 2 days away. The special project was the key to everything. I'm going back to Leo's studio. Jack said. I need to find out what he was working on before he vanished. There must be a clue in his paintings. Diane opened the secret door. The bookshelf moved back into place with a low, heavy sound. Be careful, Jack. The sun will rise soon. The town will be awake, and the mayor's men will be looking for you. The sun rose over the mountains. The sky turned from a dark blue to a bright, burning orange. Jack left Diane's house very quietly. He did not want the neighbors to see him. He walked toward the center of the town. The bank was a large building made of gray stone. It stood next to the town hall. The bank looked very strong and very safe. It had small windows with thick metal bars. Jack remembered the drawing he saw in Diane's secret room. The basement of the bank was important in Leo's floor plan. Jack did not go to the front door. Instead, he walked around to the back of the building. There was a small yard with a high wooden fence. The gate was closed with a heavy metal chain. Jack looked through a small gap in the wooden boards. In the corner of the yard, he saw a very large shape. It was covered with a thick, brown top. The top was covered in fine desert dust. It looked like it had been there for a few days. Jack looked around the street. It was still very early, and the town was asleep. He climbed over the fence carefully. He jumped down and landed on the soft sand inside the yard. He walked to the large object. He grabbed the corner of the heavy cloth and pulled it back. Under the top, there was a long, black car. It was the same car Sam the mechanic described. The car was very clean and looked very expensive. The paint was as dark as the night sky. It did not belong in a small, dusty town like Oak Haven. Jack looked at the tires. They were wide and heavy. He was sure they matched the tracks he saw at the old well. He tried to open the driver's door, but it was locked. He moved to the side window and looked inside. The interior was made of black leather. On the back seat, he saw a small wooden tube. It was the kind of tube used to carry a rolled-up painting. Jack felt a surge of excitement. This was the proof he needed. The painting was not gone. It was here, behind the bank. But why would the bank manager or the mayor hide it under a top? Suddenly, Jack heard the sound of a heavy door opening. The noise came from the back of the bank. He quickly pulled the top back over the car. He ran to a stack of wooden crates near the fence and hid behind them. He stayed very still. He tried to breathe slowly. Two men stepped out onto the back porch of the bank. One was Mr. Gable, the bank manager. He was a short man with glasses and a very neat suit. The other man was a guard in a blue uniform. "Is the car ready for Friday?" Mr. Gable asked. He looked at his gold watch. "Yes, sir." The guard replied. "The cargo is safe inside the vault. We will move it to the car at midnight." Mr. Gable nodded. "Good. The mayor is very nervous about the detective. Make sure no one enters this yard today." The two men went back inside, and the heavy door closed with a firm, metal sound. Jack waited for a long time in the shadows. He had found the car, and now he knew where the painting was. It was inside the bank vault. Jack waited until the backyard was completely silent. He climbed back over the high wooden fence and dropped onto the dusty ground of the alley. He brushed the dirt from his jacket and straightened his hat. He needed to be smart. He could not stay in the shadows forever. He decided to walk around to the front of the bank and enter like a normal customer. The front of the Oak Haven Bank was very different from the back. The large glass doors were clean and bright. Inside, the air was very cold because of the air conditioning. It felt like a different world compared to the hot desert outside. The floor was made of white stone that looked like marble. There were only two people in the lobby. One was an old man sitting on a chair, and the other was a woman at a desk. Jack walked to the woman at the desk. She looked up and smiled. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" she asked. "Good morning," Jack said. "I would like to speak with the manager, Mr. Gable. I am a visitor in town, and I want to ask about opening a small account for my business." The woman nodded. She picked up a black telephone and spoke quietly into it. After a moment, she looked back at Jack. "Mr. Gable can see you now. His office is the second door on the left." Jack walked down the quiet hallway. He reached the door and knocked. A voice from inside told him to enter. Jack opened the door and stepped into a very expensive room. There was a thick carpet on the floor and a large desk made of dark wood. Behind the desk sat the short man Jack saw earlier in the backyard. Mr. Gable looked very neat. His hair was perfectly flat, and his glasses were very clean. "Good morning, Mr. Jack," Gable said. He did not look surprised to see him. "I heard a detective was in town. Please, sit down." Jack sat in a comfortable leather chair. "You know who I am." Mr. Gable smiled. It was a very polite smile, but it did not reach his eyes. Oak Haven is a small place. News travels fast. How can the bank help a man of your profession? Jack looked around the office. He looked for anything strange. His eyes moved to the corner of the large wooden desk. There was a small silver frame. Inside the frame was a photograph. Jack felt his heart jump. The photograph was a picture of the desert rose painting. It was a very clear photo of the beautiful blue flower in the sand. "That is a beautiful painting in the photo," Jack said. He pointed to the desk. "Is it yours?" Mr. Gable looked at the photo for a second. He did not move a muscle. "That? No. It belongs to the town gallery. I just keep the photo because I like art. It is a very famous piece here. Or, it was. I heard it was lost. It is a very specific thing to have on your desk," Jack said slowly. "Especially now, when it is missing." Mr. Gable leaned forward. He folded his hands on the desk. "I am a man of business, Mr. Jack. I like valuable things. But I am also a busy man. If you do not want to talk about bank accounts, I must ask you to leave. I have a very important meeting with the mayor in 10 minutes. Jack stood up. He looked at Mr. Gable's hands. He saw that the man was holding his pen very tightly. His knuckles were white. He was very nervous. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Gable," Jack said. "I will find my way out." Jack walked out of the office and through the cold lobby. He stepped back into the heat of the afternoon. He was now certain. The bank manager was not just an observer. He was a part of the crime. He had a photo of the treasure on his desk like a trophy. Jack knew the painting was inside that bank, and he had to find a way to get it back. Jack drove back into the deep desert. The sun was directly above his head. It made the sand look white and bright. He reached the old well again. He stopped the car and looked at the broken fence. He thought about the silver button in his pocket. He also thought about the black car and the bank manager. Everything was connected to this lonely place. He walked around the well slowly. He looked at the ground very carefully. He noticed something strange about 20 feet away from the stone structure. In one spot, the sand was not smooth. There were no small ripples from the wind. The earth looked a bit higher than the rest of the ground. It looked like someone had moved the sand recently. Jack went back to his car. He opened the back and found a small metal shovel. He walked back to the uneven spot. He began to dig. The work was very hard. The sun burned his neck and his arms. Every time he moved a shovel of sand, more sand slid back into the hole. He wiped the sweat from his eyes with his sleeve. He did not stop. He felt that something was hidden here. After 15 minutes of digging, the metal shovel hit something hard. A dull, heavy sound came from the ground. Jack dropped the shovel and used his hands. He pushed the warm sand away quickly. He saw a corner of dark wood. He dug more until he could see the whole object. It was a large wooden trunk. It was old and the wood was very dry. The corners of the trunk were covered with rusty metal. There was a heavy iron lock on the front. The lock was closed tight. Jack grabbed the metal handles on the sides of the trunk. He pulled with all his strength. He breathed heavily as he lifted the heavy box out of the hole. He placed it on the flat ground near the well. The trunk was covered in dust and spider webs. Jack used a small stone to hit the rusty lock. He hit it 3 times. On the 3rd time, the lock broke and fell into the sand. Jack took a deep breath. He opened the lid of the trunk slowly. The wood made a long, high creaking noise that echoed in the silent desert. He expected to see the desert rose painting. He expected to see gold or money. But when he looked inside, the trunk looked empty at first. He felt a moment of disappointment. Then, he saw something in the corner. He reached inside and touched a piece of fabric. It was a small, torn piece of blue canvas. It was the same bright, beautiful blue as the artist's paint. Jack held the small piece of cloth in his hand. It felt rough. He looked deeper into the trunk. Under the fabric, there was a small wooden brush and a tube of blue paint. "This belongs to Leo," Jack whispered to himself. He realized the trunk was not for the painting. It was a hiding place for the artist's tools. But why would Leo bury his brushes in the middle of the desert? Jack looked at the bottom of the trunk. He saw a series of small scratches in the wood. They looked like letters. He leaned closer to read them. Jack leaned closer to the bottom of the wooden trunk. The sun was very bright, but the inside of the box was dark. He used his hand to brush away more dust. The scratches in the wood were deep. They formed several words. The writing was messy, like someone wrote it in a big hurry. "They are watching the house." The first line said, "The rose is not just a flower. It is a door." Jack stared at the words. What did Leo mean? A door. He thought about the gallery and the bank. He thought about the empty frame on the wall. He picked up the piece of blue canvas again. It was a small, square scrap of cloth. The blue color was so bright it almost hurt his eyes. It was a beautiful, deep color, like the ocean at night. He turned the piece of cloth over. The back of the canvas was white and rough. But there was something else. Someone had used a black pen to draw a small, thin line. Jack held it up to the sunlight. It was not just a line. It was a drawing of a key. Next to the key, there were 3 numbers. 104. 104, Jack said quietly. Is that a room number? Or a code for a safe? He remembered the bank. Mr. Gable was very proud of his new safe. Maybe the desert rose was the key to opening something much bigger than a frame. Jack looked at the blue paint tube from the trunk. He opened the cap slowly. The smell of oil and flowers filled the air. It was a very strong smell. It did not smell like normal paint. It smelled like the desert after a rainstorm. Suddenly, Jack heard a sound. It was not a loud noise, but it was clear in the silent desert. It was the sound of a stone falling. He stood up quickly and looked toward the hills. The wind was starting to blow. It moved the sand in small circles. About 100 yards away, he saw a flash of light. It was a reflection, like a mirror in the sun. It came from behind a large, gray rock. Someone was there. Someone was using binoculars to watch him. Jack did not wait. He grabbed the blue canvas, the paint tube, and the brush. He put them in his pocket. He left the heavy trunk on the ground and ran to his car. He jumped inside and started the engine. The car made a loud roar. He looked in his mirror as he drove away. He saw the black car. It was parked behind the hill, half hidden by the bushes. It did not follow him immediately. It just sat there, like a dark animal waiting for the right moment to move. Jack's hands were tight on the steering wheel. He had the canvas. He had the numbers. He knew that the desert rose was a secret code. But he also knew that the person in the black car was not going to let him go easily. He needed to get back to the town and talk to Diane. He needed to know what 104 meant before Friday arrived. Jack drove away from the old well as fast as he could. The dust rose behind his car like a thick cloud. He kept looking in his mirror for the black car. It did not move. It stayed behind the hill. Jack started to feel a little safer. He looked at the blue canvas in his hand. He thought about the number 104. He wanted to get back to the inn and look at his notes. But suddenly, the car felt different. The steering wheel began to shake in his hands. The car started to pull hard to the left side of the path. Jack tried to keep the car straight, but it was very difficult. He heard a flapping noise from under the car. It was the sound of rubber hitting the dry ground. "Oh no," Jack said. He slowed down and stopped the car in the middle of the sand. He stepped out and walked to the front of the car. He looked at the tires. His heart sank. The front tire on the left was completely flat. It was not just old. There was a long, clean cut in the side of the rubber. Jack walked to the back of the car. The back tire was also flat. It had the same kind of cut. A sharp knife had done this while Jack was digging for the trunk. He looked at the empty desert around him. The person in the black car did not just watch him. They had walked to his car while he was at the well. They wanted to make sure he could not leave. They wanted him to stay in the desert. Jack opened the back of his car. He looked for his spare tire. He found it. But he only had one. He had 2 flat tires. He could not fix the car. He was stuck 5 miles away from the town. The sun was very low now. The sky was a dark red color. The heat of the day was gone, and the air was becoming cold very quickly. Jack looked at his water bottle. It was almost empty. He only had a few drops of water left. He felt a sudden fear in his stomach. The desert was a beautiful place during the day, but it was a cold and lonely place at night. He looked back toward the hill where he saw the black car. It was gone now. There was no sign of anyone. He was completely alone. He knew he could not stay with the car. If he stayed, he would be an easy target for the person with the knife. He had to move. He took his flashlight and his notebook. He put the blue canvas and the paint tube in his pocket. He locked the car doors, even though it did not matter now. He looked at the distant lights of Oak Haven. They looked like tiny stars on the horizon. It is a long walk. Jack whispered to himself. He started to walk. Every step was hard. The sand was soft, and his boots sank into the ground. The wind started to blow harder. It made a low whistling noise as it moved through the dry bushes. Jack did not look back. He kept his eyes on the small lights of the town. He had to reach Diane. He had to tell her about the trunk and the numbers. He was tired and thirsty, but he did not stop. The moon was high in the sky. It was a bright, silver circle. The desert did not look yellow anymore. It looked gray and white. The temperature was very low. Jack could see his breath in the cold air. His leather jacket kept him warm, but his legs were very tired. He had been walking for 2 hours. Every step in the soft sand felt like lifting a heavy stone. He was very thirsty. His throat felt dry and scratchy, like the sand under his feet. He thought about the cold water in the inn. He thought about the blue canvas in his pocket. These thoughts helped him keep moving. He looked at the stars. They were very bright because there were no city lights to hide them. Suddenly, Jack stopped. He turned off his flashlight to save the battery. He stood very still. The desert was silent, but then he heard a small noise. It was the sound of a rock falling from a hill nearby. Then, he heard a soft rustling sound in the dry bushes. Jack did not move. He did not breathe. He looked toward the dark hills on his right. He saw a shape. It was not a cactus. It was a person. The person was standing about 50 yards away. They were watching him. Jack could not see a face, but he saw the reflection of the moonlight on a metal object. It looked like a long knife or a tool. "I know you are there," Jack said. His voice sounded small in the big desert. No one answered. The shadow moved behind a large rock. Jack waited for a long minute. His heart was beating very fast. He did not want to fight a stranger in the dark. He was tired and alone. He decided to change his path. Instead of walking on the flat ground, he moved closer to the edge of the dry riverbed. The ground there was harder and faster to walk on. He walked for another hour. His feet hurt, but he did not stop. He looked back many times. He did not see the shadow again, but he felt a cold feeling on his back. He knew the person was still there. They were following him like a wolf. They were waiting for him to fall down or fall asleep. Finally, he saw the silhouette of the town. The old water tower looked like a giant shadow against the stars. He saw the dim yellow lights of the street lamps. He felt a surge of energy. He was almost safe. He reached the first wooden building at the edge of Oak Haven. It was an old barn. He leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. He looked at his watch. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. The town was completely dark. No one was in the streets. He needed to find Diane, but her house was on the other side of town. He also needed to be careful. The mayor's men might be waiting for him at the inn. Jack looked at the quiet road ahead. He was back in town, but the danger was not over. Jack stood by the old barn for a long time. His legs felt like heavy pieces of wood. He looked at the main street of Oak Haven. It was a line of dark shapes and shadows. He did not want to walk into the center of town. He knew the mayor or the stranger in the gray suit might be waiting for him. He needed to find a place to hide and think. Suddenly, he saw two bright circles of light in the distance. A vehicle was moving toward the edge of town. It was not a fast car. It moved slowly. Jack hid behind a large wooden post. He watched the lights get closer. It was a small, dusty truck. He recognized the white color and the dent on the front bumper. It was Diane's truck. The truck stopped near the barn. The door opened, and Diane stepped out. She looked around the dark road. She looked very worried. Her hair was messy, and her eyes were wide with fear. "Jack!" she whispered. "Are you there?" Jack stepped out from behind the post. "I am here, Diane." Diane ran to him. She grabbed his arm. Her hands were very cold. "Oh, thank goodness. I went to the inn, but your car was not there. Frank told me you drove toward the desert. I was so scared. I have been driving on these back roads for an hour looking for you. My tires were cut," Jack said. He leaned against the truck. "I had to walk back. Someone followed me in the desert." Diane looked at the dark hills behind him. She looked like she wanted to cry. "We must go. Jack. Get in the truck. You are not safe in the town anymore." Jack climbed into the passenger seat. The seat was covered in old blankets. Diane got behind the wheel and started the engine. She did not turn on the highlights. She kept the lights low so no one would see them from far away. She drove away from the main street and onto a small path behind the houses. "What happened?" Jack asked. "Why are you so scared?" "The mayor came to the gallery tonight," Diane said. Her voice was shaking. "He was not alone. He was with the sheriff and two other men. They were looking for you. The mayor was very angry. He said you stole something from the old well. He told the sheriff to find you and put you in jail." "I didn't steal anything," Jack said. "I found Leo's things. I found a message." "It does not matter to them," Diane replied. She looked at him with serious eyes. "The mayor told everyone you are a dangerous criminal. He told the townspeople to stay in their homes. He is using the police to hunt you. Jack, you must leave Oak Haven before the sun comes up. If they find you, they will not let you leave." Jack looked at the blue canvas in his pocket. He thought about Leo. "I can't leave yet. Diane. I know where the painting is. It is in the bank. And Friday is the day they move it. If I leave now, the truth will stay buried in the sand forever." Diane drove the truck into a small grove of trees. She turned off the engine. It was very dark. "Then we must hide," she said. "I know a place where they will not look." Diane drove the truck slowly through the back streets. She did not use the main road. She stopped the truck behind her house, near a tall wooden fence. The house was dark. Jack followed her inside through the back door. They did not turn on the lights in the kitchen. They walked straight to the study. Diane moved the red book on the shelf. The heavy bookshelf slid open with a low, grinding sound. They stepped into the secret room and closed the door. Diane turned on a small lamp on the desk. The light was warm and bright. Jack felt safe for the first time in hours. He sat down and took a deep breath. His legs were very sore from the long walk. "Show me what you found," Diane said. She sat across from him. Jack took the objects from his pocket. He placed the small piece of blue canvas on the desk. He also placed the tube of paint and the artist's brush. Under the bright light of the lamp, the blue color of the canvas looked even more beautiful. It was a very deep and rich color. "This is definitely Leo's work," Diane whispered. She touched the cloth gently. He made this paint himself. No one else has this color. Jack turned the canvas over. Look at the back. Diane. There is a drawing and some numbers. Diane looked at the small drawing of a key and the numbers 104. She frowned. 104. What does it mean? Is it a house number? I don't think so. Jack said. Think about the bank. I saw a drawing of the bank's basement in this room earlier. And the bank manager, Mr. Gable, has a photo of the painting on his desk. He said he likes valuable things. Diane's eyes became wide. The bank has safe deposit boxes in the basement. They are small metal boxes where people keep their gold, their jewelry, or important papers. Each box has a number. Box 104. Jack said. He nodded his head. Leo was not just a painter. He was a witness. He saw something, and he hid the key or the information in the bank. The desert rose painting is probably the key to opening that box. Or maybe the painting itself is hidden in a bigger safe, and box 104 holds the truth about the mayor. But how can we get into the bank? Diane asked. The mayor and the sheriff are looking for you. The bank is full of guards. Friday is the town party. Jack reminded her. The mayor said the deal is happening on Friday. At midnight, they will move the cargo to the black car. That is our only chance. We need to get into the bank before they move the painting. Diane looked at the blue canvas. I have a key to the gallery, but I do not have a key to the bank. However, Leo's drawing showed a path. Remember, the secret door behind the empty frame in the gallery. Jack stood up. He felt a new strength. The mystery was starting to make sense. The gallery and the bank are next to each other. If there is a tunnel, we can get inside without using the front door. Jack stayed in the secret room until the sun was high in the sky. He knew it was dangerous to move during the day, but he could not wait. He needed to see the place where Leo worked. Diane told him that Leo had a small studio near the edge of the desert. It was an old wooden building behind a row of tall rocks. I will go alone. Jack said. It is safer that way. If the sheriff sees you with me, you will be in trouble too. Diane looked worried, but she nodded. She gave him a small map of the area. Jack left the house through the back garden. He moved through the narrow spaces between the buildings. He wore a different hat and a dark shirt. He wanted to look like a local workman. He saw a police car drive slowly down the main street, but the driver did not look at him. After walking for 20 minutes, Jack reached the studio. It was a simple building with large windows. The wood was gray from the sun and the wind. Jack stopped and looked around. The desert was very quiet. He walked to the front door. He saw that the door was not closed. It moved back and forth in the wind. He pushed the door open. Jack stepped inside and stopped. His eyes became wide. The room was a complete mess. Shelves were pulled away from the walls. Hundreds of tubes of paint were squeezed out onto the floor. The colors were mixed together in a sticky, ugly pool of red, yellow, and blue. Every canvas in the room was torn. The white fabric was cut into small pieces. It looked like someone was looking for something very small and very important. Jack walked carefully over the broken glass on the floor. He saw a wooden chair in the center of the room. It was broken into 3 pieces. A heavy table was turned upside down. The person who did this was very angry. They did not just search the room. They wanted to destroy it. Jack looked at the walls. There were no paintings left. Only empty hooks remained. He walked to the back of the studio. There was a small sink for washing brushes. In the sink, Jack saw a bottle of black ink. The bottle was open, and the ink was spilled over a stack of papers. He reached into the sink and picked up the papers. They were wet and dark. He tried to separate them, but the ink made it difficult. He saw some drawings of the desert, but the ink covered the details. Then, he found one piece of paper at the bottom. It was a drawing of the desert rose painting. But this drawing was different. It showed the flower, but it also showed lines across the petals. The lines looked like the streets of a town. It really is a map. Jack whispered. He heard a sudden noise outside. It was the sound of a car engine. Jack ran to the window and looked out. The long, black car was pulling up to the studio. Two men in dark suits stepped out. They were carrying heavy metal tools. Jack knew he could not leave through the front door. He looked around the room. There was a small, high window in the back wall. He grabbed the broken chair and placed it against the wall. He climbed up and pulled himself through the small opening. He dropped onto the sand outside just as the front door of the studio opened. Jack lay flat on the sand behind the studio. He pressed his body against the cool earth. He heard the heavy footsteps of the men inside. They were throwing things and moving furniture. One man shouted with anger. He sounded very frustrated. "It is not here." The man yelled. The mayor said the artist kept a record of everything. "We must find that book before Friday." Jack stayed very still. He did not move a muscle. He heard the men walk out of the front door. The engine of the black car started with a low roar. The sound of the car moved away until the desert was silent again. Jack waited for 5 more minutes. He wanted to be sure they were gone. He climbed back through the small window. The studio was even more of a mess than before. The men had broken the sink and ripped the wallpaper from the walls. Jack looked at the floor. He remembered what Diane said about Leo. Leo was a man who liked to hide things. He was a clever man. Jack walked to the center of the room. He looked at the wooden floorboards. Most of them were covered in spilled paint. But near the back corner, one board looked slightly different. It did not have any paint on it. It was very clean. Jack knelt down. He used a small metal tool to lift the edge of the board. The board moved easily. Underneath the floor, there was a small, dark space. Jack reached his hand inside. His fingers touched something soft and cool. He pulled it out. It was a small diary with a brown leather cover. Jack sat on the floor and opened the diary. The pages were full of Leo's neat handwriting. He began to read. The diary started 6 months ago. Leo wrote about his life in Oak Haven. At first, he was happy. But then, the writing changed. "The mayor visited me today." One page said, "He wants me to use my special blue paint for a secret project. He says it is for the town, but he is acting very strange. He watches me while I work. I feel like a prisoner in my own studio." Jack turned the pages quickly. He reached the end of the diary. The last entry was written on the night Leo disappeared. The ink was a bit messy, as if Leo was writing very fast. "I found out the truth." The diary said, "The painting is not just art. It is a map to the rose in the sand. The mayor wants the treasure for himself. He thinks I am helping him, but I have hidden the real map. If they find me, look for the rose in the sand. It is the only way to save the town." Jack closed the diary. His heart was beating fast. "Rose in the sand." He whispered. He thought it was the name of the painting, but the diary made it sound like a real place. He put the diary inside his jacket. He needed to get back to Diane's house. He needed to ask her if she knew a place with that name. He looked out the window. The sun was starting to go down. The sky was becoming a dark purple. Jack left the studio and started his walk back to town. He felt like he was holding a very important secret in his pocket. The mystery of Oak Haven was finally starting to open up. Jack arrived back at Diane's house as the sky turned a deep, dark blue. He was tired, but the leather diary in his pocket felt heavy and important. He entered through the back door. Diane was waiting for him in the kitchen. She looked very nervous. She was holding a cold cup of tea. "You are back," she said. "Did you find anything?" Jack took out the diary. He showed it to her. Leo kept a diary. He knew the mayor was dangerous. He wrote about a place called Rose in the Sand. "Do you know a place with that name?" Diane shook her head slowly. She looked at the book with sad eyes. "No. I have never heard of a place called that. I thought the Desert Rose was just the name of the painting. But Leo was a man of secrets. Maybe it is a place far out in the desert." Before Jack could speak, a loud, heavy sound echoed through the house. It was a rhythmic sound that came from the center of the town. The large iron bell in the town square was moving. This sound always meant a town meeting. In Oak Haven, the bell only rang for very important news. "The mayor is calling the people." Diane whispered, "We should see what he is saying." Jack and Diane moved to the front of the house. They did not go outside. Instead, they went to a small window on the second floor. From there, they could see the town square. Many adults were walking toward the wooden platform in the middle of the street. They looked worried. They talked in low voices. Mayor Miller stood on the platform. He wore his large brown hat and his dark suit. He looked very tall and very powerful under the street lamps. Sheriff Miller stood next to him. The sheriff had his hands on his belt. He looked at the crowd with a serious face. The mayor raised his hands. The crowd became silent. "People of Oak Haven." The mayor shouted. His voice was loud and reached every corner of the square. "We have a problem. A stranger is in our town. He says he is a detective, but he is a dangerous man. He is looking for our secrets. He wants to steal from us. I'm telling you now for your safety. Stay inside your houses." A woman in the crowd raised her hand. "What about the artist? Leo? Is he safe?" The mayor narrowed his eyes. "Leo left town because of this stranger. The detective scared him away. From now on, there is a new rule. No one can be on the streets after 8 o'clock at night. The sheriff will walk the town. If you see the stranger, call the police immediately." The people began to talk at once. Some looked angry, and some looked afraid. They began to walk back to their homes. The mayor watched them go. He had a small, cold smile on his face. He looked toward Diane's house for a second. Then he stepped down from the platform. Jack pulled the curtain shut. "He is turning the whole town against me," he said. "He wants to make sure no one helps me before Friday." "The people trust him," Diane said. "They don't know the truth. We only have 1 day left. Jack, tomorrow is Thursday. On Friday, the deal happens." Jack looked at the diary. He knew he had to be very fast and very quiet. The mystery was no longer just about a painting. It was a race against the mayor's lies. The night was long and cold. Jack and Diane waited in the secret room until 3 o'clock in the morning. This was the time when the town was at its quietest. Even the sheriff's car had stopped moving. Jack knew they had to act now. Thursday was their last chance to find the truth before the mayor's deal on Friday. "We need to go to the gallery," Jack said. He checked his flashlight. Leo's diary said the painting is a door. If there is a tunnel to the bank, it must start there. Diane nodded. She put on a dark coat. They left the house through the back garden and moved like ghosts through the shadows. The town felt different with the new curfew. The silence was heavy and felt dangerous. Every time a dog barked in the distance, they stopped and waited. They reached the red brick gallery. Diane used her key to open the side door. The air inside was still and smelled of paint. Jack walked straight to the empty spot on the wall where the desert rose used to hang. He looked at the heavy gold frame that was left behind. Leo was a master of machines. Diane whispered. He told me once that the frame was the strongest part of the wall. Jack examined the frame. He didn't look at the gold. He looked at the wooden back. He saw a small, round hole near the bottom corner. It was perfectly circular. He took out the tube of blue paint he found in the desert. He realized the cap of the tube had a very specific shape. He pressed the cap into the hole. There was a soft click. Suddenly, the entire wall behind the frame began to move. It did not swing. It rotated slowly. A narrow opening appeared. It was dark and smelled of damp earth. Jack turned on his flashlight. The beam of light showed a set of stone stairs leading down into the ground. The findings in the passage. The stairs. Old, stone steps that looked very sturdy. The walls. Made of reinforced concrete. Likely built when the bank was constructed. The direction. The tunnel went straight toward the building next door. The Oak Haven Bank. Stay here, Diane. Jack said. If I am not back in 20 minutes, go to the garage and find Sam. He is the only one we can trust. Jack stepped into the tunnel. The air was thin. He walked for about 50 feet. The tunnel ended at a heavy metal door. There was no handle, only a small keypad. Jack remembered the blue canvas from the desert. He looked at the numbers written on the back. 104. He pressed the numbers into the keypad. The light on the machine turned from red to green. The door opened with a hiss of air. Jack stepped through and found himself in a large, cold room filled with metal boxes. He was inside the bank's vault. The room was silent, but in the center, on a velvet table, sat the desert rose painting. It was not rolled up. It was standing upright. In the bright light of the vault, Jack saw that the painting had changed. Under the gallery lights, it looked like a flower. But here, under the vault's blue security lights, hidden lines appeared on the canvas. It wasn't just a painting of a rose. It was a complex, glowing map of the desert. Jack realized the truth. The mayor didn't want the painting for its beauty. He wanted the map to find the rose in the sand, a hidden treasure or a source of wealth that Leo had discovered. Jack stood frozen in the center of the bank vault. The air was so cold his breath came out in small, white clouds. The blue security lights overhead made the desert rose glow with an eerie, electric light. It wasn't just a painting anymore. It was a living document. The hidden ink, invisible to the naked eye, reacted to the specific frequency of the vault's lighting. The lines were thin and precise. They didn't just show streets, they showed geological formations, depth markers, and ancient landmarks. Jack pulled out his notebook and began to sketch as fast as his cold fingers would allow. Observations of the secret map. The centerpiece. The petals of the rose weren't just decorative. They represented the layers of rock in the Crystal Canyon 10 miles north of town. The path. A dotted line started at the old well and wound through the Devil's Teeth rock formations. The destination. An X was marked inside a cave structure labeled in the diary as the rose in the sand. It's not gold. Jack whispered, looking at the technical notes scribbled in the margins of the canvas. It's a lithium deposit. In 2026, lithium was more valuable than gold. If the mayor could claim the land before the government found out, he would be the richest man in the state. He wasn't just a small-town thief. He was a corporate conspirator. Suddenly, a loud clacking sound echoed through the metal walls of the vault. It was the sound of the main gears in the bank door turning. Someone was opening the vault from the front. Jack looked at the heavy door. He had no time to run back through the tunnel without being seen. He looked around the room. There were rows of safe deposit boxes. He saw a small gap between the back of a shelf and the wall. He squeezed his body into the dark space, pulling his legs in just as the massive vault door swung open. A pair of polished black shoes stepped onto the marble floor. "Be careful with it," a voice commanded. It was Mayor Miller. "The buyer is arriving tomorrow night. If there is a single scratch on this canvas, the deal is off." "We've got the black car ready, sir," another voice said. It was the sheriff. "But what about the detective?" "My men found his car at the well, but he's gone." The mayor let out a low, dry laugh. "He's probably cat food for the coyotes by now. No one survives a night walk from the well without water. Forget him. Focus on the cargo." Jack watched through the small gap as the sheriff and another guard lifted the desert rose from the table. They placed it inside a long, silver case and locked it. They didn't even look toward the back of the room. They were too focused on the prize. As the heavy door began to close again, Jack realized he was about to be locked inside the bank vault. He had to make a choice: stay hidden and hope they didn't come back, or move now. The massive steel door of the vault moved with a heavy, grinding sound. Jack knew that once those gears locked, the room would become an airtight tomb. He didn't have minutes. He had seconds. As the sheriff and the mayor stepped out, their shadows stretching long across the floor, Jack lunged from his hiding spot. He stayed low, crawling like a predator through the darkness toward the small keypad door he had entered from. The heavy vault door was inches from ceiling when the mayor turned back for one last look. Jack froze. He pressed himself against the cold metal of the safe deposit boxes. The mayor's eyes scanned the room, but the blue security lights created deep, deceptive shadows. After a heartbeat that felt like an hour, the mayor grunted, stepped out, and the door slammed shut. The sound was like a thunderclap in the small space. Locked. Jack breathed out, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was alone in the dark, but he wasn't trapped. He turned back to the small keypad door. He punched in 104 again. The door hissed open, and he scrambled back into the narrow tunnel. He didn't stop running until he reached the back of the gallery. Diane was waiting, her face a mask of pure terror. When she saw him, she nearly collapsed. "They took it," Jack panted, leaning against a stack of crates. "The mayor and the sheriff. They have the painting in a silver case. But I saw it, Diane. I saw the map." He pulled out his notebook and showed her the quick sketch of the Devil's Teeth and the Crystal Canyon. "It's not just a painting," he explained, his voice low and sharp. "It's a map to a massive lithium deposit. In today's world, that's worth more than the entire state. The mayor isn't just stealing a painting. He's trying to steal a fortune from the people of Oak Haven." Diane looked at the sketch, her eyes tracking the lines. "The Devil's Teeth. That's an old mining area. It's dangerous. The ground is unstable. If Leo found something there, he wouldn't have told the mayor. He would have wanted it to belong to the town. That's why he's missing," Jack said. He refused to give them the exact coordinates. They have the map now, but they probably still need him to interpret the geological markers. If he's alive, that's where he is. The final mission plan. Target: the Devil's Teeth rock formations. Objective: locate and rescue Leo before the deal at midnight tomorrow. Obstacle: the sheriff's patrols and the mayor's private security. "We can't use the truck," Jack said, his mind racing. "The sheriff is looking for it. We need something faster and quieter." Diane looked toward the back of the gallery, where an old torp covered a shape in the corner. "Leo has an old dirt bike. He used it to scout for painting locations in the canyons. It's small, fast, and can go where cars can't." Jack pulled back the top. The bike was dusty, but the tires were thick and the engine looked well maintained. It was a tool for a ghost. "Get some water and a first aid kit," Jack told her. "The sun will be up soon. I'm going into the teeth." The engine of the old dirt bike kicked to life with a sharp, metallic growl. In the quiet of the gallery's back room, it sounded like an explosion, but the thick brick walls muffled the noise from the street. Jack checked the fuel gauge, half full. It would have to be enough. Diane handed him a small canvas bag. Water, some dried fruit, and a flare gun. If you find him and you're in trouble, fire it. I'll be watching from the water tower. Stay hidden, Diane, Jack said, pulling on a pair of old leather goggles he found in the workshop. If I'm not back by noon, get Sam and get out of town. The mayor isn't playing for small stakes anymore. He rolled the bike out into the cool pre-dawn air. The sky was a bruised purple, the stars beginning to fade in the east. Jack didn't use the headlight. He knew the desert paths well enough from his maps, and a light would be a beacon for the sheriff's patrols. He twisted the throttle and accelerated, the tires throwing up a spray of fine gravel as he vanished into the shadows of the scrub brush. The Devil's Teeth were a series of jagged, vertical rock fins that rose out of the desert floor like the teeth of a buried giant. They were made of a strange, dark stone that seemed to swallow the light. As Jack approached, the temperature dropped. The wind whistled through the narrow gaps in the rocks, creating a low, moaning sound that made the hair on his neck stand up. He stopped the bike a mile away from the main formation and walked the rest of the way. He found the X from the map. It led to a narrow crevice between two of the tallest teeth. The ground here was different. It wasn't just sand. It was mixed with white, crystalline flakes. The lithium Leo had documented. Following the white trail, Jack saw a flickering light deep within the rocks. It wasn't the steady glow of a flashlight. It was the dancing orange of a campfire. He moved closer, his boots silent on the stone. In a small natural amphitheater hidden by the rocks, a tent was pitched. Outside the tent, two men in khaki uniforms sat on folding chairs, rifles leaning against a crate. They were talking and laughing, oblivious to the man watching from the shadows. "How long do we have to keep the old man here?" one guard asked, tossing a pebble into the fire. "Until the mayor gets the signature on the land deed," the other replied. "Friday at midnight. Once the money clears, the artist can go, one way or another." Jack's jaw tightened. He looked past the guards toward the back of the clearing. There, tied to a wooden post inside a shallow cave, was the man from the photograph. Leo. He looked thin and exhausted, his head resting against his chest, but he was alive. Jack watched the two guards from the darkness. His heart was a steady drum against the cold stone. He had one advantage. They thought he was dead or lost in the desert. He looked at the flare gun Diane had given him. He couldn't use it for help. The town was too far, and the only people who would see it were the sheriff's men. But he could use it for chaos. He looked at the layout of the camp. The guards were positioned between him and the cave where Leo was tied. The fire was small, but it threw enough light to make a direct approach impossible. The strategy. The distraction. Jack moved silently back toward the dirt bike. He didn't start the engine. Instead, he found a large, dry bush and dragged it near the edge of a steep drop-off. He set the bush on fire with his lighter and pushed it over the edge. The reaction. The burning bush rolled down the hill like a fireball. The guards jumped up, shouting. "What was that? Is the desert on fire?" one yelled. They both ran toward the edge of the cliff to see what was happening. The infiltration. While the guards were distracted by the rolling fire, Jack moved. He sprinted across the clearing, staying low to the ground. He reached the shadow of the cave in seconds. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of damp stone. Leo's eyes flew open as Jack approached. The artist looked terrified, his mouth covered by a heavy cloth. "Sure," Jack whispered, pulling a small pocket knife from his belt. "I'm Jack. Diane sent me. We're getting you out of here." He cut the ropes around Leo's wrists and ankles. The artist's hands were raw and bruised, and he stumbled as he tried to stand. Jack caught him, throwing Leo's arm over his shoulder. "The map." Leo rasped, his voice barely a whisper. Did they find it?" "They have the painting," Jack said, "but they don't know everything yet. We have to move, Leo. Now." They started to edge out of the cave, moving toward the back of the Devil's Teeth. But as they reached the edge of the firelight, the sound of a powerful engine echoed through the canyon. A pair of bright, white beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the jagged rocks. The black car was arriving. "Hey!" one of the guards screamed, turning back from the cliff. "The old man is loose. Get them." Jack didn't hesitate. He pulled the flare gun and aimed it directly at the crate of supplies next to the guards. The flare hit with a blinding white light and a loud boom, sending sparks and smoke everywhere. "Run!" Jack yelled, half carrying Leo toward the hidden dirt bike. The guards were blinded and coughing, but they started firing their rifles into the dark. Bullets chipped the stone near Jack's head. He reached the bike, helped Leo onto the back, and kicked the starter. The engine roared, and they fishtailed out of the canyon just as the black car swung into the clearing, its tires screaming on the rock. The wind screamed past Jack's ears as he pushed the dirt bike to its limit. Behind them, the twin beams of the black car's headlights bounced violently against the rock walls. The car was fast, but the terrain was Jack's ally. The narrow, sandy paths between the teeth were too tight for a luxury sedan. "Hold on!" Jack shouted over the roar of the engine. Leo gripped Jack's waist, his knuckles white. Jack veered off the main trail, plunging the bike into a dry wash filled with loose gravel. The bike fishtailed, but Jack kept it upright, steering toward a cluster of boulders that looked like a dead end. At the last second, he leaned the bike hard to the left, slipping through a gap barely wider than his shoulders. The black car slammed its brakes, the sound of screeching tires and crunching metal echoing behind them as it clipped a rock. They had a lead, but it wouldn't last. Jack didn't head back to town. Instead, he circled wide, heading for the one place the mayor wouldn't expect: Sam's garage. Arrival at the garage. By the time they reached the metal building, the sky was turning a pale, dusty gray. The first light of Friday morning was breaking. Jack killed the engine and rolled the bike into the shadows of the scrap heap. The side door of the garage creaked open. Sam stepped out, holding a heavy wrench. When he saw Jack and the exhausted man behind him, his eyes went wide. "Leo," Sam whispered, dropping the wrench. "Everyone said you were halfway to the coast." "The mayor is a liar, Sam," Jack said, helping Leo into a chair inside the cool, oil-scented workshop. "We need a place to hide for a few hours. And we need to talk." Sam locked the doors and pulled the heavy metal shutters closed. "The town is crawling with security. They're setting up for the birthday party in the square. It's a madhouse." The secret of the rose. Leo took a long drink of water, his hands finally stopping their shake. He looked at Jack, then at the sketch Jack had made of the glowing map. "You saw it," Leo said, his voice stronger now. "The blue paint. It's made from the lithium crystals themselves. That's why it glows under the right light. But the map doesn't just show the location. It shows the entry code." "Entry code to what?" Jack asked. "The rose in the sand," Leo explained. "It's an old military bunker from the 1950s, hidden under the canyon floor. The government abandoned it, but the lithium deposits have grown inside the ventilation shafts. It's a cave made of white fire. The mayor found the old records, but he couldn't find the entrance without my map. The Friday midnight plan. The deal. The buyer, the man in the gray suit, is arriving at midnight during the fireworks show. The cargo. They will move the silver case containing the painting, the map, and the deed to the land from the bank to the black car. The trap. The mayor plans to leave Oak Haven forever once the money is transferred. He's going to sell the town's future for a suitcase full of cash," Sam growled, hitting the table with his fist. Jack looked at his watch. It was 7 a.m. They had 17 hours. We're not going to let that happen. Sam, can you fix my car? I need to get back to the well. There's something I missed in that trunk. The sun climbed higher, baking the metal roof of the garage. Inside, the air was still and smelled of grease. Sam was working quickly, his hands moving with the practiced rhythm of a man who had spent his life under a hood. He had sent his young assistant home early, telling him the garage was closed for the town holiday. "Your car is at the well, Jack," Sam said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I can't get a tow truck out there without the sheriff seeing us. But I have an old Jeep in the back. It's ugly, but it's fast on the sand. You take that." Leo was resting on a cot in the back room, his breathing deep and steady. He looked frail, but the fear had left his eyes. "Be careful, Jack," he warned. "The mayor knows the rose is more than a painting. He knows it's a key. But there is a physical key, too. I hid it in the trunk, but not where you would expect." Jack nodded, grabbed the keys to the Jeep, and headed out. He avoided the main road, taking the dry creek bed north. The Jeep bounced and rattled, but it handled the dunes with ease. He reached the old well in less than 30 minutes. The desert was empty. His blue car sat where he had left it, the two flat tires looking like wounded feet. The wooden trunk was still there, sitting in the sand near the stone well. Jack knelt beside it. He had already looked inside, finding the canvas and the paint, but he had been in a rush. He remembered the scratches in the wood. The rose is not just a flower. It is a door. The second inspection. The exterior. He checked the base of the trunk. It was solid oak, reinforced with iron. The lock. He looked at the broken iron lock. Nothing hidden there. The lining. He ran his fingers along the inside of the trunk. The wood felt smooth, but near the back left corner, there was a slight bump. Jack pulled out his pocket knife and carefully pried at the lining. The thin piece of wood popped out, revealing a hollow space. Inside was a small, heavy object wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it and found a solid brass key. The head of the key was shaped like a stylized desert rose. "This is it," Jack whispered. This wasn't a key for a door. It was a key for a machine. He looked at the key closely. Etched into the brass were the coordinates for the entrance to the lithium bunker, the real rose in the sand. But there was something else in the hollow space, a small, recorded microchip and a note from Leo. "In case they kill me, this is the recording of the mayor and the buyer. They didn't know I was painting behind the curtain while they talked. This is the proof the town needs." Jack felt a surge of triumph. He had the map, he had the key, and now he had the evidence to put Mayor Miller behind bars. But the clock was ticking. The town's birthday party was starting in a few hours. The fireworks would begin at midnight, and under the cover of the noise, the mayor would make his move. He jumped back into the Jeep. He had to get back to Sam's, get Leo to safety, and then find a way to stop the black car before it left Oak Haven forever. Jack drove the Jeep back to the garage like a man possessed. He kept his eyes on the horizon, watching for the dust clouds that would signal a pursuing sheriff's vehicle. Fortunately, the desert remained silent. Most of the town's force was likely busy managing the crowds for the centennial celebration. When he slid the Jeep into the garage, Sam and Leo were already waiting by the back door. Jack didn't say a word. He simply held up the brass key and the small microchip. "Leo, you're a genius," Jack said, catching his breath. "I found the key and the recording." Sam cleared off a workbench and brought over an old laptop. His hands were greasy, but he handled the microchip with the care of a diamond merchant. He slotted it into a reader, and after a few seconds of static, voices filled the small, metal room. "Mayor Miller. The public won't care about the land once they see the money coming in for the new park. By then, the lithium rights will be signed over to your firm. The buyer. And the artist. He's a liability." Mayor Miller. Leo is a dreamer. He'll be handled. The deal is set for Friday at midnight. During the fireworks, the black car leaves with the deed and the map. We meet at the airstrip. The recording was crystal clear. It was the smoking gun Jack needed. The bastards, Sam growled. They're going to turn Oak Haven into a strip mine and leave us with nothing but a hole in the ground. Not if we play this right, Jack said. He looked at the clock. It was 6 p.m. The sun was beginning to set, casting a long, golden light over the town. Sam, do you still have that old radio transmitter? The one you use for the town's emergency broadcasts? Sam's eyes lit up. It's in the back. It's powerful enough to override the speakers in the town square. The Friday night strategy. The diversion. Diane will stay in the square, keeping an eye on the mayor and the buyer. The transmission. Sam and Leo will set up the radio in the back of the Jeep. Once the fireworks start, they'll broadcast the recording across the entire town. The retrieval. Jack will go back to the bank. He needs to intercept that silver case before it reaches the black car. They'll be expecting me at the bank now, Jack noted. But they won't expect me to come from the gallery side again. They think they've secured the vault. Take this, Sam said, handing Jack a heavy-duty walkie-talkie. The signal is encrypted. Once you have the painting, give me the word. I'll start the broadcast, and we'll give the mayor a birthday present he'll never forget. Jack looked at Leo. You stay with Sam. When this is over, you're going to be the man who saved this town, not the man who left it. Leo gripped Jack's hand. Just get the rose back, Jack. It's the soul of Oak Haven. Jack stepped out into the twilight. The sound of a distant brass band began to play. The party was starting, and the clock was ticking down to the final showdown. The clock tower in the center of Oak Haven struck 11. The town was alive with light and sound. People crowded the streets, children ran with glowing sticks, and the smell of fried dough and popcorn filled the air. In the square, a large stage had been built, where the mayor was shaking hands and smiling for the local cameras. Jack slipped through the side door of the art gallery. He didn't turn on his flashlight this time. He knew the path by heart. He moved past the empty frames and the smell of oil paint, his heart a steady beat of adrenaline. He reached the secret wall and pressed the blue paint cap into the hidden hole. The wall rotated. Jack descended the stone stairs into the cool, damp earth of the tunnel. He reached the vault door and checked the time on his watch. 11:45 p.m. He had 15 minutes before the fireworks began. The tactical situation. The vault. Currently guarded by 2 of the sheriff's deputies in the basement lobby. The route. The silver case will be carried up the service elevator to the back alley. The distraction. At midnight, the first mortar of the fireworks display will launch. That is the signal. Jack moved to the end of the tunnel. He didn't open the keypad door yet. Instead, he pulled a small fiber-optic camera, another tool from his kit, and slid it through a tiny gap in the door frame. On the small screen in his hand, he saw the basement lobby. The mayor was there, looking at his watch. Next to him was the stranger in the grey suit, his black briefcase cuffed to his wrist. The sheriff stood by the vault, the silver case already in his hands. The car is idling in the alley, the sheriff said. The driver is ready to move the moment the first rocket hits the sky. Excellent, the mayor replied. He looked pale, but determined. Once we're clear of the town limits, the money will be transferred to the offshore account. Jack pulled the camera back. He gripped his walkie-talkie. Sam, are you in position? The radio crackled. We're behind the water tower, Jack. The antenna is aimed straight at the square's PA system. We're just waiting for your signal. 5 minutes, Jack whispered. He looked at the keypad. He knew that as soon as he opened the door, the silent alarm would trigger in the sheriff's office. But with the fireworks and the crowds, no one would notice a small red light on a dashboard. He took a deep breath. 11:59 p.m. The crowd outside began the countdown. 10, 9, 8. Jack punched in the code. 104. The door hissed open. At the same moment, the first firework exploded above the town with a massive, window-rattling boom. The sky turned a brilliant, burning red. Jack stepped into the lobby. The mayor and the sheriff spun around, eyes wide with shock. "You!" the mayor screamed, his voice nearly lost in the second explosion of the fireworks. "I thought you were dead." "I'm a hard man to kill, Miller," Jack said, his voice cold and steady. "And an even harder man to lie to." Thought. The basement lobby was a chaos of red and gold light as the fireworks continued to hammer the sky above. The sheriff reached for his sidearm, his face twisted in a snarl, but Jack was faster. He didn't pull a gun. He keyed his walkie-talkie. "Now, Sam. Let the town hear the truth." Outside, the festive music in the town square suddenly died. It was replaced by a sharp burst of static that cut through the cheers of the crowd. Then, a voice boomed over the massive speakers, not the mayor's practiced, friendly tone, but the cold, calculating voice from the recording. "Mayor Miller. The public won't care about the land once they see the money coming in. By then, the lithium rights will be signed over to your firm." The mayor's face went from pale to a ghostly white. He looked toward the ceiling as if he could see through the layers of concrete to the thousands of people outside who were now listening in stunned silence. "The buyer. And the artist. He's a liability. Mayor Miller. Leo is a dreamer. He'll be handled." "Turn it off," the mayor shrieked, lunging at Jack. "That's a lie. It's a fake." "The whole town is listening, Miller," Jack said, dodging the mayor's clumsy swing. "They know about the lithium. They know about Leo. And they know you were going to leave them with nothing but a poisoned desert." The sheriff froze, his hand still on his holster. He looked at the mayor, then at the silver case in his hands. He was a corrupt man, but he wasn't a fool. He could hear the roar of the crowd outside. It wasn't a cheer anymore. It was the sound of an angry mob. "You promised this would be clean, Miller," the sheriff growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You didn't say the whole town would be watching the back door." Suddenly, the service elevator dinged. The doors slid open, and a group of townspeople, led by Sam and a very tired but determined Leo, stepped out. They had come through the back alley, guided by the sound of the recording. Leo stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the silver case. "Give it back, Sheriff. That map belongs to the people of Oak Haven. It's the future of this town, not a paycheck for a traitor." The man in the gray suit, seeing the tide turn, tried to slip toward the stairs, but Sam blocked his path with a heavy iron tire iron. "You're not going anywhere, city boy. We have some questions about your firm." The sheriff slowly let go of the silver case. He put his hands up, looking at the angry faces of the men he had grown up with. "I was just following orders," he muttered, though no one believed him. Jack walked over and picked up the silver case. He opened it carefully. Inside, the desert rose sat in its velvet lining, the secret map still glowing faintly under the basement lights. "The mystery is over, Miller," Jack said, looking the mayor in the eye. "Oak Haven is keeping its rose." The sun rose over Oak Haven on Saturday morning with a clarity the town hadn't felt in years. The dust had settled, literally and figuratively. State police cruisers now lined the main street, their blue and red lights a stark contrast to the quiet desert sky. Mayor Miller and the sheriff had been taken away in handcuffs, along with the buyer and his briefcase of empty promises. Jack sat on the front porch of the inn, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand. For the first time since he arrived, the coffee actually tasted good. The new reality. The legal front. The microchip recording was accepted as primary evidence. The mayor was charged with conspiracy, kidnapping, and attempted land fraud. The economic shift. With the lithium map secured, the town formed a community trust. Instead of a destructive strip mine, they planned a sustainable extraction project for the deposits, ensuring Oakhaven's wealth stayed in Oakhaven. The artistic return. The Desert Rose was re-hung in the gallery. This time, however, it was protected by a laser security system that even Jack would have trouble bypassing. Leo stood in the town square, surrounded by neighbors who were apologizing for ever doubting him. He looked younger, the weight of the secret finally lifted from his shoulders. He caught Jack's eye and gave a small, dignified nod. He didn't need words. The restoration of his life was thanks enough. Diane walked up the porch steps and sat in the chair next to Jack. She looked exhausted but peaceful. "The town council met this morning," she said, leaning back. "They want to name the new community center after you. The Jack Revere Hall of Justice. What do you think?" Jack let out a short, dry laugh. "Tell them the Leo Rossi Center sounds much better. I was just the guy who followed the breadcrumbs. He was the one who survived the desert." "You're too modest, Detective," Diane smiled. "Where will you go now? There are probably 100 other small towns with secrets out there." Jack looked out toward the horizon, where the Devil's Teeth stood like silent sentinels. "My car is fixed, my bill at the inn is paid, and I think I've had enough sand in my boots to last a lifetime. I hear there's a case in the Pacific Northwest involving a missing lighthouse keeper and a suspicious amount of fog. Sounds like a nice change of pace." He stood up, adjusted his hat, and picked up his suitcase. "One last thing, Diane," Jack said, pausing at the top of the steps. "The Desert Rose. Leo told me it's not just a map. He said he actually painted it for someone. Any idea who?" Diane looked away, a small blush creeping onto her cheeks. "He always was a bit of a romantic. Maybe some secrets are better left as mysteries." Jack tipped his hat, walked down to his shining blue car, and drove toward the edge of town. As Oakhaven faded into the rearview mirror, he saw the Desert Rose one last time. Not the painting, but the real flower, blooming stubbornly in the white sand by the side of the road. The transition from the dry, suffocating heat of Oakhaven to the damp, heavy air of the Pacific Northwest felt like stepping into another dimension. Jack's blue car, now sporting new tires and a fresh coat of wax that struggled to repel the constant drizzle, wound its way along the jagged cliffs of the Oregon coast. The landscape was a mosaic of deep greens and slate grays, a stark contrast to the orange dust he had left behind. Point Grey was a town that seemed to cling to the edge of the world, its buildings weathered by salt and time. Jack pulled up to a small, cedar-shingled cottage overlooking the churning Pacific. This was the home of Elena Vance, the woman who had reached out to him while he was still scrubbing desert sand out of his upholstery. She was waiting on the porch, wrapped in a thick wool sweater, her eyes fixed on the distant silhouette of the Point Grey lighthouse. The lighthouse hadn't shone its beam in 3 weeks. Not since her father, Elias Vance, had vanished during a particularly violent storm. "You're the man from the papers," Elena said as Jack stepped out of the car. Her voice was steady, but there was a tremor in her hands. "The one who found the artist in the desert. My father isn't an artist, Mr. Revere. He's a man of science and tradition. He wouldn't just leave his post. Not for anything." Jack tipped his hat, the brim already heavy with rainwater. "I don't care much for what the papers say, Miss Vance. I care about the facts. Tell me about the night he disappeared." The police report said the door was locked from the inside. Elena led him into the cottage, where the smell of cedar smoke and old books greeted him. She laid out a map of the coastline, but it wasn't a standard nautical chart. It was covered in strange, hand-drawn symbols that looked remarkably like the geological markers Jack had seen on Leo's lithium map. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather ran down his spine. "He was obsessed with the tides," Elena explained. "But not for the ships. He said the water was changing. He was tracking a specific mineral signature in the spray. He called it the oceanic pulse. On the night he vanished, he sent me a single text message. "The rose is blooming in the water." Jack froze. The rose again. It was a name that followed him across state lines. He realized then that the Oak Haven lithium deposit wasn't an isolated fluke. It was part of a larger, perhaps global, pattern, and Elias Vance had found the second petal. The lighthouse wasn't just a guide for ships. It was a laboratory for something much bigger. The hike up to the Point Grey lighthouse was a grueling ascent through a forest of ancient firs that seemed to groan in the wind. Jack carried a heavy waterproof pack, his boots slick with mud. He reached the summit just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, though the thick cloud cover made it feel like twilight had lasted all day. The lighthouse stood like a lonely sentinel, its white paint peeling in long strips like dead skin. Jack used the key Elena had provided to open the heavy iron door. The air inside was cold and stagnant, smelling of grease and ozone. He began his search on the ground floor, moving through the kitchen and the living quarters. Everything was in its place. A half-finished cup of tea sat on the table, now covered in a thin layer of mold. It was as if Elias Vance had simply stepped out of time. As Jack climbed the spiral staircase, the sound of the crashing waves grew louder, echoing up the central shaft. He reached the lantern room at the top. The great Fresnel lens, a masterpiece of glass and brass, sat motionless. It was designed to magnify a small light into a beam that could be seen for 20 miles, but now it looked like a giant, sightless eye. Jack noticed something strange about the lens. One of the glass prisms had been replaced with a different material, a translucent, pale blue crystal. He touched it, and his fingers felt a faint, rhythmic vibration. It was the same lithium-based crystal structure Leo Rossi had described. Elias wasn't just tracking the mineral. He was using the lighthouse to transmit a signal with it. He looked at the floor beneath the lens and found a series of scratches in the metal. They were numbers, etched with a steady hand: 208. 104 in the desert. 208 on the coast, Jack muttered to himself. He pulled out his notebook, the pages damp. If the numbers doubled, was there a 416 somewhere in the mountains? Or were these coordinates? He leaned closer to the crystal prism and noticed a tiny engraving on its base. It wasn't a rose this time. It was a stylized anchor with a lightning bolt wrapped around it. The logo of the syndicate the mayor had mentioned in his recorded confession. Suddenly, the lighthouse's secondary emergency light flickered to life, casting long, distorted shadows against the glass. Jack saw a reflection in the lens that shouldn't have been there. A man in a dark, high-tech wetsuit was standing on the exterior gallery, his hand holding a silenced pistol leveled at Jack's chest. The security hadn't stayed in Oak Haven. They had followed the trail to the coast. The man in the wetsuit didn't fire. Instead, he gestured with the barrel of the gun for Jack to step away from the lens. Jack raised his hands slowly, his mind calculating the distance. The wind howled outside, shaking the glass panes of the lantern room. The mayor was a greedy amateur. Revere. The man said, his voice muffled by a tactical mask. He thought the lithium was for batteries. He didn't understand the resonance. Give me the crystal, and maybe you'll live to see the sunrise. Resonance for what? Jack asked, shifting his weight. Communication? Or something more destructive? Elias Vance wouldn't help you, would he? That's why he's gone. The man stepped forward, but the lighthouse groaned as a massive wave slammed into the base of the cliff below. The floor tilted slightly, and Jack seized the moment. He grabbed a heavy brass cleaning tool from the ledge and swung it with all his might. It caught the man's arm, sending the pistol skittering across the metal floor. They lunged for each other, a desperate struggle in the cramped, rotating space of the lantern room. Jack managed to shove the intruder against the railing of the gallery, but the man was younger and stronger. With a powerful kick, the stranger knocked Jack backward and scrambled for the pistol. Knowing he couldn't win a gunfight in an open glass room, Jack did the only thing he could. He grabbed the blue crystal prism, ripped it from its housing, and dove for the spiral staircase. He tumbled down the stairs, the sound of suppressed gunshots shattering the glass prisms above him. He reached the living quarters and ducked behind Elias's heavy oak desk. His hand hit a loose floorboard, the same trick Leo had used. He pulled it up and found a small, salt-stained journal. Jack didn't have time to read. He stuffed the journal into his jacket, crawled to the service window, and kicked it open. He dropped 15 feet into a thicket of gorse bushes, the thorns tearing at his clothes. He didn't stop to check his wounds. He ran into the woods, the beam of a high-powered flashlight sweeping the trees behind him. He reached the jeep. Sam's loner was still his best friend, and tore down the mountain road. He didn't go back to Elena's cottage. He knew the syndicate would be watching it. He drove until he reached a secluded trailhead 5 miles away. Under the dim dome light of the car, he opened Elias's journal. The first page was dated just 2 days before the disappearance. The frequency is increasing. The Oak Haven Rose was the trigger, but Point Grey is the amplifier. If they synchronize the 208 signal with the 104, the crustal stability will fail. They aren't mining, they're triggering a harvest. Jack spent the night in the jeep, parked under the heavy canopy of a logging road. He didn't sleep. He spent the hours poring over Elias Vance's notes. The harvest mentioned in the journal referred to a theoretical method of deep earth extraction that used high-frequency vibrations to shatter mineral-rich strata, bringing them to the surface. It was efficient, but it was catastrophic for the local environment, often resulting in massive earthquakes. Elias had calculated that the syndicate needed 3 points of resonance to stabilize the harvest beam. Oak Haven was the first. Point Grey was the second. The third point was marked on a map in the back of the journal. Mount Cresta, a dormant volcano in the Cascade Range. 104, 208, 416. Jack whispered. The numbers aren't just safe codes. They're frequencies in megahertz. He realized the blue crystals weren't just valuable minerals. They were tuning forks for the planet's crust. If the syndicate activated all three, they could extract billions in rare earth elements. But Point Grey would slide into the ocean and Oak Haven would be swallowed by a sinkhole. At dawn, Jack used a payphone at a lonely gas station to call Diane back in Oak Haven. The line was scratchy, filled with the hum of long-distance interference. "Jack, is that you?" Diane's voice sounded frantic. "Something is happening here. We're having small tremors every 20 minutes. Leo says the ground is humming. He's terrified. Tell Leo to stay away from the bank vault." Jack commanded. "The syndicate is trying to synchronize the Oak Haven site with the coast. I have the crystal from the lighthouse, which should buy us some time, but they're heading for Mount Cresta. I need you to contact the State Geological Survey. Tell them to look for a sub-frequency at 416 megahertz. Jack, be careful," Diane said. A black helicopter was seen flying north an hour ago. They're moving fast. Jack hung up the phone. He looked at the blue crystal in his hand. It was glowing brighter now, pulsing with a soft, rhythmic light. It was reacting to the proximity of the other sites. He knew he couldn't stop the syndicate on his own, but he had the one thing they needed to complete the circuit, the Point Grey prism. He drove toward the mountains, the emerald green of the coast giving way to the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Cascades. The mystery was no longer about a missing man or a stolen painting. It was a race to stop a man-made disaster. Mount Cresta was a fortress of rock and ice. The syndicate had built their primary facility inside an abandoned Cold War-era bunker deep within the mountainside. Jack approached from the eastern ridge, using a pair of binoculars to scout the entrance. The area was swarming with private security, and the black helicopter he had heard about was parked on a reinforced helipad near the summit. Unlike the desert or the coast, this was a military-grade operation. They had perimeter sensors and thermal cameras. Jack knew he couldn't sneak in the same way he had before. He needed a Trojan horse. He looked at the blue crystal. It was now vibrating so hard it made his palm go numb. He took a piece of copper wire from his toolkit and wrapped it around the crystal, connecting it to the Jeep's battery. The crystal began to emit a high-pitched whine that set his teeth on edge. "If they want the frequency, I'll give it to them," Jack muttered. He put the Jeep in gear and jammed a heavy rock onto the accelerator. He aimed the vehicle straight for the main security gate. As the Jeep roared down the incline, Jack rolled out of the door and into a snowbank. The Jeep crashed through the gate, and the crystal, overloaded by the battery, shattered with a blinding flash of blue light and a localized electromagnetic pulse. The security cameras went dark. The thermal sensors flickered and died. The guards scrambled in confusion as their radios filled with static. Jack used the chaos to sprint toward the ventilation shaft he had identified from Elias's journal. He dropped into the dark, metallic tunnel, sliding down dozens of feet until he hit a heavy grating. He kicked it open and landed in a room that looked like a NASA control center. In the middle of the room sat a massive iron vault, its doors open. Inside the vault was a giant version of the lighthouse lens, but instead of a lamp, it held a massive, glowing blue core, the 416 MHz resonator, and standing in front of it, tied to a chair but looking remarkably defiant, was Elias Vance. "You're late, Mr. Revere," Elias said, a faint smile on his weathered face. "But just in time for the finale." Behind Elias, a man in a tailored grey suit, the superior to the man Jack had faced in Oak Haven, turned around. He held a remote detonator. "You destroyed my coastal prism, Revere. But the mountain is strong enough to compensate. In 5 minutes, the harvest begins." The air in the control room was thick with the hum of the 416 MHz resonator. Marcus Thorne, the man in the grey suit, didn't look like a typical criminal. He looked like a CEO, calm and precise. He adjusted his silk tie as the screens behind him displayed a map of the world, 3 points glowing with a malevolent blue light. "Oak Haven, Point Grey, and Mount Cresta. You've been a persistent thorn in our side, Mr. Revere," Thorne said, his voice echoing in the metallic chamber. "But you're thinking too small. You think this is about a few lithium mines. This is about the lithium-7 isotope enrichment on a planetary scale. By using the Earth's own tectonic resonance, we can separate the isotopes within the crust. We aren't just mining, we are refining the entire planet into a fuel source." Jack looked at Elias Vance. The older man was pale, but his eyes were sharp. "It won't work, Marcus." Elias spat. "The harmonic convergence is too high. You'll shatter the tectonic plate before the separation is complete. You're not refining a fuel source, you're building a global detonator." Thorne smiled, a cold, clinical expression. "Progress requires risk, Elias. The tremors in Oak Haven are merely the settling of the soil. Once the harvest is complete, we will have enough energy to power the syndicate's operations for a century." He turned back to the control panel. "Activate the primary beam." Jack moved slowly, his hands near his belt. He had no gun, but he had his notebook, his wits, and the heavy brass key he had retrieved from Oak Haven. He noticed that the resonator was held in place by a series of electromagnetic stabilizers. If he could disrupt the balance, the whole system would collapse. "And what happens to the people?" Jack asked, trying to keep Thorne talking. "The families in Oak Haven? The fishermen at Point Grey? They're just collateral damage in your business plan. In the grand cycle of history, individuals are irrelevant." Thorne replied, his fingers dancing over a touch-sensitive screen. "Only the structure remains." Suddenly, the floor beneath them groaned. A deep, sub-bass vibration shook the mountain. The harvest had begun. The blue core in the center of the room began to spin, its light becoming a blinding white. Jack saw his opportunity. He lunged toward Elias, but a guard intercepted him, his fist connecting with Jack's ribs. Jack rolled with the punch, his eyes never leaving the resonator. The mountain began to scream. It wasn't the sound of wind or shifting rock, but the high-pitched shriek of metal under extreme tension. The resonator was pulsing now, throwing off waves of heat that made the air shimmer. Thorn ignored the alarms, his eyes fixed on the data streams. The resonance is peaking. Thorn shouted over the noise. Stabilize the 104 and 208 nodes. Jack scrambled to his feet, clutching his side. He saw Elias struggling against his bonds. The guard moved in again, but Jack didn't wait for a fair fight. He grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it, the metal canister connecting with the guard's helmeted head. The man slumped to the floor. Jack reached Elias and sliced through the ropes with his pocket knife. "Can you stop it?" Jack yelled. Elias rubbed his wrists, looking at the central console. "I can't stop the beam from here. It's locked into a feedback loop with the Oakhaven node. But if we can introduce a counter-frequency, we can force the system into a destructive interference state. We need to ground the core." Jack looked at the iron vault. The core was suspended by 4 magnetic pillars. "If I jam the brass key into the alignment track, will that work?" "It's too dangerous," Elias said. "The electrical discharge will be massive. You'll be lucky to survive the arc flash. Better than a global earthquake." Jack replied. He pulled the Oakhaven key from his pocket. The brass rose felt hot in his hand, vibrating in sympathy with the mountain. He looked at Thorn, who was frantically trying to adjust the stabilizers. Thorn saw Jack moving toward the core and pulled a small, sleek pistol from his coat. "Don't be a hero, Revere." Thorn screamed. "You'll kill us all." "That's the plan," Jack muttered. He threw the fire extinguisher at Thorn to distract him and lunged for the magnetic pillars. The air between the pillars was thick with ionized gas, smelling of ozone and burnt hair. With a roar of effort, Jack jammed the heavy brass key into the main alignment gear. The world turned white. A massive arc of blue electricity jumped from the core to the brass key, surging through Jack's arm and throwing him across the room. He hit the far wall, his vision swimming with dark spots. The sound of the mountain changed. The high-pitched scream turned into a low, discordant growl. The white light of the core flickered and turned a sickly, bruised purple. On the monitors, the 3 points of light, Oakhaven, Point Grey, and Mount Cresta, began to blink red. Destructive interference. Elias shouted, standing over secondary terminal. "The Oakhaven node is shutting down. The feedback is destroying the resonators." Marcus Thorn stood in the center of the room, his pistol forgotten on the floor. He watched his life's work disintegrate. The central core began to vibrate so violently that the glass panels of the control room shattered. "No! We were so close." The extraction was at 80%. The bunker began to cave in. Heavy concrete slabs fell from the ceiling, crushing the expensive computers. Thorn looked at Jack, his face a mask of pure hatred. But before he could move, a secondary explosion from the power room sent a wall of flame through the lobby. Thorn vanished into the smoke. "Jack! We have to go." Elias grabbed Jack's jacket, dragging him toward the ventilation shaft. Jack's arm was numb, his sleeve charred from the electrical arc, but he managed to find his feet. The mountain was now tearing itself apart. Not from the harvest, but from the sudden release of all that stored energy. They scrambled back into the dark tunnels, the sound of the exploding bunker echoing behind them like a dying beast. The descent through the mountain's interior was a nightmare of claustrophobia and falling rock. Jack and Elias moved through the darkness, their only light the flickering beam of Jack's battered flashlight. The ventilation shafts were warping, the metal twisting like tinfoil under the pressure of the mountain's shift. "This way," Elias called out, leading Jack toward an old maintenance tunnel that wasn't on the modern maps. The syndicate used the old mining veins to hide their cables. "If we follow the conduits, they'll take us to the lower access hatch." The air was getting colder, a sign that they were moving away from the burning core and toward the mountain's heart. Jack's arm was throbbing with a dull, rhythmic pain, but he focused on the sound of Elias's breathing. He thought about Diane in Oak Haven and Elena on the coast. He hoped the tremors had stopped. They reached a point where the tunnel had collapsed, a massive pile of granite blocking their path. "We're trapped," Jack whispered, the light of his flashlights dimming. "No," Elias said, pointing to a small fissure in the rock. "Look, there's a draft, and it smells like ice." They squeezed through the narrow gap, the rock scraping against their shoulders. On the other side, the tunnel opened into a vast, natural cavern. But it wasn't a cave of stone. It was a cave of ancient, blue ice. A subglacial river flowed through the center, its surface frozen solid. "The frozen river," Elias said, awe in his voice. "It's a natural heat sink. This is how the mountain survived the core's heat. If we follow the ice, it leads to the eastern glacier." But as they stepped onto the ice, a light appeared behind them. A flashlight. Then another. The syndicate security teams hadn't all perished in the blast. They were hunting the men who had destroyed their future. The guards didn't shout. They simply began to fire. The sound of the gunshots echoed through the ice cavern, the bullets ricocheting off the frozen walls. Jack and Elias dove behind a large outcrop of blue ice. "We can't stay here," Jack hissed. "They have us pinned." Elias looked at the frozen river. "The ice is thick, but it's brittle from the tremors. If we can break the surface, the current underneath is fast. It leads to the valley floor." "You want us to jump into a subterranean glacier river?" Jack asked, looking at Elias as if he'd lost his mind. "It's the only way to outrun the bullets, Jack." Jack looked at his bag. He still had the flare gun Diane had given him. He remembered the oil-based paint tubes from Leo's studio. He grabbed a tube of red paint and smashed it against the ice, then aimed the flare gun at the oily mess. "Close your eyes," Jack yelled. He fired. The flare ignited the paint and the trapped gases in the ice. A massive explosion of red flame and steam filled the cavern, blinding the guards. The heat cracked the ice beneath them. The frozen surface gave way. Jack and Elias were swept into the freezing, lightless water below. The current was a physical force, pulling them through the mountain's guts at terrifying speeds. Jack held his breath until his lungs felt like they would burst, the ice-cold water numbing his skin instantly. Then, suddenly, the pressure changed. They were spat out of the mountain's side, tumbling into a deep snowbank under the starlit sky. Jack dragged Elias from the snow, both of them shivering violently. The mountain behind them was silent now, a plume of dark smoke rising from the summit into the cold night air. The syndicate's bunker was gone, buried under thousands of tons of rock. "We made it," Elias gasped, his breath hitching in the cold. "Not yet," Jack said, pointing to the sky. The black helicopter was rising from the trees, its searchlight cutting through the darkness. It was Marcus Thorne. He had escaped the fire, and he was hunting for the two men who knew the truth. The light swept over the snow, getting closer. Jack looked at the jeep, which was still stuck in the gate at the entrance. Miles away, they were on foot, soaked and freezing. He looked at the flare gun in his hand. It was empty, but then he remembered the microchip in his inner pocket. He had the recording, the data from the lighthouse, and the sketches from the vault. "Elias, can you walk?" "I'll crawl if I have to," the old man replied. They moved into the thick tree line, using the shadows of the firs to hide from the helicopter's light. Jack knew Thorne wouldn't give up. The harvest might have failed, but the data Jack possessed was worth billions to the right people, or worth a death sentence to the wrong ones. They reached a small ranger station, its windows dark. Jack broke the lock and found an old radio. It wasn't powerful enough to reach the coast, but it was enough to broadcast a distress signal to the local search and rescue teams. He set the frequency to the emergency channel and began to broadcast their coordinates. "Come and get us, Thorne," Jack whispered. "The whole world is about to start listening." 24 hours later, the ranger station was surrounded by federal agents and news crews. The Mount Cresta incident was the lead story on every channel. The syndicate's involvement in the tremors at Oak Haven and the disappearance of Elias Vance was being unraveled by a task force of investigators. Jack sat in the back of an ambulance, a warm blanket wrapped around his shoulders. His arm was bandaged, the burn from the electrical arc a permanent reminder of the 416 MHz frequency. Elias was nearby, being reunited with Elena. The look on her face when she saw her father was the only reward Jack needed. Diane arrived a few hours later, having driven straight from Oak Haven. She looked at Jack and sighed. "You look like you've been through a meat grinder, Revere. You should see the other guys." Jack joked weakly. "How is Oak Haven?" "The humming stopped the moment you hit that resonator," Diane said, sitting next to him. "Leo is helping the university team study the crystals. He says they're stable now. The town is safe." Jack pulled the salt-stained journal from his jacket. "It's not over, Diane. This journal mentions 4 more sites. The syndicate was a global operation. Mount Cresta was just the regional hub. Then we have a lot of work to do," Diane said, taking his hand. "We?" Jack asked. "You don't think I'm letting you have all the fun, do you? Someone has to make sure you actually write your reports." The final evidence against Marcus Thorne and the syndicate didn't come from the vault or the journals. It came from the Desert Rose itself. When the state police analyzed the painting under the direction of Jack and Leo, they found a layer of microprinting hidden within the blue paint's crystalline structure. Leo had not just painted a map, he had encoded the syndicate's entire financial ledger into the brushstrokes. He had known that a physical book would be found, but a painting in a public gallery was the perfect hiding place for the truth. The ledger revealed a network of corrupt politicians and corporate leaders across 3 continents. The harvest was a front for a massive money laundering scheme that used rare earth minerals to bypass international banking regulations. "He was a genius," Jack said, looking at the high-resolution scans of the painting. He knew they would come for him, so he made the truth immortal. The arrests followed like falling dominoes. Marcus Thorne was captured at a private airfield in Canada, trying to board a flight to a non-extradition country. The man in the grey suit would finally have to answer for the lives he had disrupted. The trial of Marcus Thorne was the trial of the century. Jack stood as the lead witness, his voice steady as he recounted the events from Oak Haven to the frozen rivers of Mount Cresta. He showed the jury the brass key, the charred notebook, and the glowing blue crystals. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, a cheer went up from the crowd outside the courthouse. For the people of Oak Haven and Point Grey, it was more than just a legal victory. It was the return of their future. The syndicate's assets were seized, and the funds were used to establish a global environmental protection agency dedicated to monitoring tectonic resonance. Elias Vance was named the head of the Coastal Division, and Elena became his primary researcher. Jack stayed in the city just long enough to see the final papers signed. He felt a strange sense of emptiness. The mystery was solved, the bad guys were in jail, and the world was safe. But for a man like Jack Revere, silence was the loudest sound of all. Jack stood by his blue car, the Pacific Ocean breeze ruffling his hair. He looked at the Point Grey lighthouse, its beam now cutting through the fog with a steady, reassuring light. He had a new hat, a clean jacket, and a fresh notebook. Diane stood next to him. "So, what's next?" "I heard there's a strange case in New Orleans involving a jazz trumpeter and a series of missing artifacts." Jack smiled and pulled a folded letter from his pocket. It wasn't a case file. It was a letter from a small town in the Midwest. "Actually," Jack said, "I think I'm going back to Oak Haven for a while. Leo is finishing a new mural in the square, and he says he needs a consultant for the fine details." "A consultant, huh?" Diane laughed. "And besides," Jack added, looking at the horizon, "the desert has a way of staying with you. The desert rose isn't just a mystery anymore. It's a part of the story." He opened the car door and gestured for Diane to get in. As they drove away from the coast, heading back toward the sun-drenched sands of the desert, Jack realized that the best mysteries weren't the ones you solved, but the ones you lived through. The engine hummed, the road opened up, and Jack Revere drove into the sunset, ready for whatever the next chapter would bring.